Hey everybody, it's Monday, and we had an awesome person booked, which you know because we put out posts and graphics and all this stuff with Mick Guzauski, but he's not here. He's not here, and I'm really sorry about that. These things happen. We all work in a crazy business, and stuff changes all the time, even very last minute. So it's possible he could just show up at some point. That could always happen. But as far as I know, unfortunately, Mick will not be here this week. So presumably we will reschedule that. But you may recognize Mark from such videos as The Plug-In Show.
Right.
Or is it that Plug-In Show? I can't.
The Great Big Plug-In Show.
The Great Big Plug-In Show. Yeah. Right. I'm so sorry. I am so unprepared for this.
I'm so offended.
So could I just ask you questions about Mick, and you'll just tell me?
And I'll try to answer. Yeah.
No. So here we are. We're here on a Monday. We have the time blocked out. I have what's left of my coffee. I have almost a pint of vodka, which I will get through very quickly. And so we're going to do something because we're going to do something. So Mark thinks that we should do one of these unboxing the classics things, which I am not prepared for at all. I have literally just downloaded Studio One, which is how these tracks are packaged. I have not set up an OBS thing to share the screen of it, so I'm going to have to do that on the fly if we're going to do this. But we were thinking we would ask in the chat what people would like for tonight, or is everyone just like, that's it, they've left,
like, I'm out of here?
Yeah, exactly, because Mick's not here. So okay. I mean, obviously
I could explain what the Mix the Music thing is real quick.
Yeah, why don't you explain that, and then we can pick a topic that I will blab about, or we can do this unboxing thing. So Mark, take it away.
All right, so the Unboxing Classic series is something that we've started to shoot. I believe there's only one up on YouTube so far with Fab. And basically what happens, we have a partnership with a company called Mix the Music. And they have a bunch of multi-tracks from songs that you love that, you know, are hard to come by. And how it works is you go to Mix the Music and you can download these multi-tracks. You guys can do it too. They're all available for sale. And they only open in Persona Studio One. But you open them up and it's the multi-track from the session. So you can see the entire catalog on there. And how we've done it in the past is there's a game show style wheel at the beginning. So we don't tell the mentor, you know, what song they're going to do. And then we spin a wheel and it picks a song. And then they're like, oh, I guess I'm opening up this song. They might not know anything about it. It could be Nookie from Limp Bizkit. It could be James Brown. Who knows? But because we are kind of flying by the seat of our pants here, we're going to let Andrew pick his song or have you guys pick the song. So that's kind of number one for tonight is if you guys want to see Andrew open up a multi-track.
If you want to see me be completely unprepared. Yep. That's what we would do. And I'm just realizing I would just share my screen in Zoom. I wouldn't even bother messing with OBS.
Oh, there you go.
Except no, because I'm only showing this window. So I don't think it would show up. Yeah. So if you want to watch me relearn OBS on the fly, that's something we could do.
Share your OBS screen.
Because of course I set this up 2 years ago and I don't remember at all. So we could do that. Or if there is a topic, I think like we've talked about Atmos enough recently, and we've talked about SoundFlow quite a bit recently, and there's going to be. Because I teased this during the SoundFlow 5 preview, well, not preview, sort of release show that we did with Christian, the Bounce Factory app. But I think we're going to save that for a night when I'm actually prepared to talk about it. But it is almost done. So if you are somebody who bounces mixes and has to make stems and things like that, it's pretty exciting. But I don't think we're going to do that tonight. But so, Mark, what's going on in the crazy chat where everybody's like, what's happening here?
Well, right now everyone's saying they hear me twice, so I'm going to change my microphone here.
That's
I don't know if
weird.
You heard me twice.
Wow.
Let me. I'm going to change my microphone to these things that are in my ear. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can still hear you, but I that's weird. I mean, unless it's coming back through my mic, which has never happened before. Or,
Right.
hold on, maybe something in.
They say nobody's left. Everybody's hanging in there.
All right.
We have someone who says they're newer to recording and mixing in Studio One, so that would be fantastic for them.
They're not going to learn anything about Studio One because I don't know anything about it. I'm going to be hitting play, and I'm assuming you can solo things.
Andrew unboxes Studio One. That's what this is about.
So is this better with the hearing Mark twice?
One person says it's good now, so I'll just roll with the earpods.
That's weird. Yeah.
Cool.
I've never understood how when we stream from my computer that people hear things that I'm not hearing. Like we get a lot of comments about the volumes being different between the guests and me. I am literally mixing my microphone with Zoom in loopback, and it's a single audio stream that goes to the stream, and still the balance changes. It makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. Yeah, but like that should be impossible.
Guess who's here?
Is Mick here?
Mick's here.
Oh, thank God for that.
You've been bailed out.
I have been bailed out.
We might have to do this anyway at some point.
At some point. Hey, Mick.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Mick.
Hi. Hold on.
You're here.
Hey, Mick. We're
Sorry
here. We're
about
live.
that. I thought it was 12.
All right. No worries. No worries at all. Thank you so much for coming. We're live already. We're going.
Wow.
So,
Great.
That's good. Yeah, we were just telling everybody that we were going to have to come up with something else to do, but I am much happier.
I'm so
No worries.
2:30. I thought it was 3. I was just getting up. Excuse me. I have to have my coffee.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm having a post-dinner coffee.
Before I can be coherent at all.
That's all right. I won't be coherent ever. So it's all good.
Good to see you, Mick.
Good seeing you too.
Well, since Mick is here, I will see you guys in the Q&A.
All right. See you in a bit, Mark.
See you guys.
Hi, Mick.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this, and happy Valentine's Day. I'm glad you could be my Valentine. And I'm assuming you're coming to me from your house studio thing.
Yeah, not in the studio, but house. Yeah.
Nice. So, as you may or may not know, these interviews are generally very long, but it can be as long as you've got time for. And it's just about your entire story. And I started prepping for yours. And obviously, your career is insane. But strangely, you haven't done a huge number of interviews. You've done some, and then there were a lot right around Daft Punk, obviously.
Yeah.
But there haven't been as many as I thought there were going to be. So what I wanted to do, and what I've found when I do these with people who have discographies like yours, is it sort of turns into this thing where I just start like listing records, and then you say something about it, and that's always a little bit weird. But what I really want to spend some time on, if you're okay with this, is how you got started, because it's sort of well-known-ish how you got into this, but there's some holes in there that I'd love to fill in if that's cool.
Okay.
So you grew up in Rochester, which is upstate New York.
Yeah.
And from what I got, you worked at a hi-fi store, but you immediately sort of seemed to know that recording was a thing. And what I'm really curious about is, like, as a kid, were you playing instruments, or like what were you into musically, and how did you discover that making records was a thing?
Well, ever since I was a little kid, I'd always, like everybody, would always listen to pop records and stuff's on the radio. I'm talking about here in the in the early '60s for me, I just got very curious about how this was made, how performance was put on disc, and how even though they were basic effects then, like reverb, delays and stuff, how it was done, and some records were done, back then, of course, very artistically, and how to employ technology into art. I'm not a musician. I was always been interested in electronics and being a music lover, and that's really how I started.
And were there any records in particular that kind of made you go, hold on a second? That's not what stuff sounds like.
Let's see. Of course, like everybody, the Beatles took it to a whole level.
Yeah.
But that was a little later. I mean, it was what I listened to. But I think the first record I had was going back to the late '50s, and I listened to it all the time. These records I had Hound Dog and All Shook Up by Elvis Presley. I had Wake Up Little Susie by the Everly Brothers. I had, let's see, what else? I had some strange ones because I was a little kid. That I had Dinner with Drac by John Zachary, the Halloween record. Just trying to really remember the really early stuff I had. Anyways,
yeah, but like I guess even on those early Elvis records and things, just the effects on the vocal, like that'd make you go like, hold on a second. Yeah, something's going on here. So it's really interesting, though, that because with a lot of people, it's not something they notice. I mean, you talk about it as if, well, everybody's interested in how they do that. But a lot of people would never notice that at all.
Right. And I didn't know people didn't notice. I thought, hey, this is,
Yeah. So then when you were in high school, you built your own studio, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was like half of the basement of the house. It's small. And this is when I had this job at a hi-fi store doing minor repairs because I was, decent at that kind of stuff when I was about 15. And so I could really get junk equipment for free or very cheap. And I had, this was in probably 67, 68. So there were no semi-pro or affordable recording equipment back then, so I sort of had to improvise. And so I got, there was a couple old Ampex recorders that I got. I think it was a model 970 or 960. It was a reel-to-reel machine, single motor, very, very unreliable transport. And I had two of these, and I would and I built a mixer, and I think I had an Ampex MX35 mixer a little later on, and recorded tracks, local bands onto one machine and copied to the mixer to the other one to overdub vocals. And so, I had a reverb called a Fisher Space Expander.
Oh yeah,
which was a spring reverb, same, the Hammond spring that Fender amps use and everything.
Yeah.
And I put little foam rubber things next to the springs to get it to sound less springy. And I had the thing sort of hung at an angle. I was just trying to figure out how to get this thing to sound halfway decent.
Well, can we, now you skipped over something pretty gigantic there, that you built yourself a mixer.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's not something 15-year-olds do.
No, I wasn't 15. I think I was about 17.
Okay, it's not something 17-year-olds do either. So where did the electronics background and the ability to do audio circuits and things come from?
Well, at this point, it was sort of basic circuitry. I wasn't designing the amplifiers or anything at this time. I used to go drive to New York City quite often. And hang out and bug people at studios.
And how did you manage to do that?
I just walked in.
You just showed up.
Yeah, I just showed up, and it was at Capitol. The Capitol used to have a studio in New York on 48th Street. And so I just showed up one day, and I met this guy there who was a very active guy in the AES for a long time, named Irv Joel. Do you know him?
I know the name, yeah.
Yeah. And he was like the head chief engineer there. And, he just sort of pointed me in direction and showed me enough stuff that I got some discrete amplifier cards. I forgot who gave them to me, but they're just a couple of them for an old console. I just used, it was pretty much a passive network I built, just some pots, resistors, going into a couple amplifiers, and it sort of worked. I didn't have preamps in it. I used I had some old Shure SM67 or M67 mixers, and later I got some Ampex MX35s. So this first console was very, super simple. Anybody could do it.
Well, I beg to differ. Not everybody.
I had for EQ, I used the late '60s Advent made a little graphic equalizer, 10-band graphic equalizer. So I had that. And,
Right.
a friend of mine who was a little older than I was and was really good with electronics built a compressor.
Wow.
For a broadcast station, a little basement radio station. He didn't use it anymore, so he lent me that. So I had this compressor, which was sort of based on a CBS Volume X.
Right.
Then that same guy, Bill Thompson, his name is, he started this company, Ashley Audio.
Mm-hmm.
They're still around. I think he sold it, but this guy was brilliant. I mean, he in the early '70s, and he was building some really nice compressors and parametric equalizers. We hung out, and he taught me so much about circuitry and electronics. And after that, I could at least build stuff that would work.
Right. And did you ever study anywhere, or this is all just picked up along the way?
Now, this is all picked up along the way. I had very little formal education. It was more like, I knew what I wanted to do, tried college for electronics after high school, just wasn't like into that detail of it. I wanted to make records,
Right.
And, yeah. So I quit college after a year and just worked into this. See what I was going to tell you more about this. Never mind.
No, go ahead.
I had an idea, and then we talked. I had a senior moment. So
all right, okay. But I'm always up for more info about anything. So
I'll think about it. But
all right.
But there's let's see. So that was late '60s. Now also there was a guy named Bill Dangler who had a little studio in Rochester at the time, and he had a Scully 4-track machine, a 1/2-inch 4-track. So we're talking 1970 now, 69, 70. And he never used this thing. And he goes, hey, if you do tape duping for me, just do me favors and stuff, take this machine home and use it.
Wow.
So I had that. And then, I replaced those old funky Ampex 970s that had lots of wow and flutter with a Revox G36, which was a home version of a Studer. It was made by Studer, and it was actually a very good sounding machine, even though it was, home, and that ran at 15 IPS, which I thought was, man, I got something really cool now. So, so between a few, couple 2-track machines and that, and then I got more mixers. Then I built my second, my second console. Well, not really a console. I had 2 racks. I think I have a picture of this somewhere. I had 2 desktop racks, and one had 2 Ampex MX35 mixers in it, and the other one had this line mixing console that I built that had five faders,
Wow.
left, center, right switches, Q send, and echo send.
Wow.
So I said, yeah. So I had in this echo chamber, this Fisher space expander that I still had was mono. So the 5th fader was my echo return, mono echo return. And then I had Q send and then a send to this. And it was, it worked out pretty good.
Man, and were you just doing demos for local bands, or what were you recording?
I was doing demos for local bands, mostly, but there were some great musicians in Rochester back then. So, sometimes I do jingles, and Steve Gadd came and was playing on some, Tony Levin.
Wow.
They were great musicians then. So I grew up with that. And also, Chuck Mangione was from Rochester. So, and I worked for part-time for a guy who had a sound company there, Dick Zakari, and he used to do Chuck's sound locally at the time. And Chuck would put together these orchestra concerts at Eastman Theater, and anyway, so since and you know, and the PA system back then was like 69 and 70 was very, you know, we used the same Ampex mixers and just kludged together as much stuff as we could.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just brought everything from my basement and the Scully 4-track and recorded the concert, and he released it. That was the Friends in Love album in 1970.
Oh, right.
It was recorded in 69. I listened to it now. Oh, it's a recording is terrible, but it was my first professional recording.
Wow.
And the thing I was going to mention that I forgot and now remember is a little bit of formal training I had is at Eastman School of Music in 68, 69, around there. They had a recording workshop course in the summer, you know, for a few weeks. And Phil Ramone would come up from New York to teach.
Right.
And that was it. When I took that for a couple summers in a row, I was hooked.
Wow. So you went from completely making it up, because of course, you know, Mix Magazine hadn't started that. Like there's no real resource.
There was DV Magazine.
Right.
Remember that one?
Yeah, but I mean, did that have a lot of?
I think, and recording engineer producer. No, that was a couple years later.
Yeah, so it's not like, you know, going on YouTube and watching a bunch of stuff about how to do it. But then 2 weeks with Phil Ramone.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, it wasn't just Phil. It was Phil and another engineer who was also from A&R Studios, but went up to Toronto. Dave Green, Ed Green's brother. He taught. A guy named Neil Muncie from a company called Suburban Sound in DC, who was a tech. He built. This was before, before you could just go out and buy a console. So he built these custom consoles for A&R, and he built one for small one for Eastman School of Music. And they were sort of interesting. They had these. It was really, I think the EQ was, if I remember right, it was a 2-band EQ. It was made by a company called Melcor. Which and it was I think the physical size of it was a 500 series.
Right.
Melcor made an op amp, 1731, which after some modifications was the API 2520.
Right.
And that's what the studio at Eastman had, a custom console with that and these little equalizers. Now I don't know if Saul Walker was involved in this stuff, but this was like pre-API. It was like the ancestry of API.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And I think, you know, obviously there's so much nostalgia for the good old days of the analog gear, but like that era of analog gear, there weren't mass-produced cheap components where you're going to get an entire like mixer on a chip kind of thing. It all kind of had to be discrete in a way.
Yeah.
So there was only so bad it was going to be, really.
Yeah.
I suppose
there was... there were op amps coming out at the same time. I think early Electrodyne consoles were they were late 60s, right?
Yeah.
They were very modern looking for their time. They worked pretty well. They used old 709 op amps in some of them. And like, you know, I mean, I never even saw one until a couple of years later, and I'd look at the catalog and drool over this. Oh man, I want one of these things. Looks like a spaceship.
Man. So, but that's a pretty serious, like, education, even if it's only a couple of weeks. So I just want to get a sense of what it was like for you right before you went in for that first recording workshop, and what it was like sort of during and after. Did it just completely explode your brain and you went up to another level, or like what was it? 'Cause
it was well, yeah, I mean, it did really help my techniques as far as recording, and it did but I think the biggest thing about it was really how to interact and deal with clients. I would say that was my biggest takeaway from it, because I mean, I was a guy in a basement, worked with local bands. This was before the Mangione sessions even, had no idea. You know, I knew a little bit of technical stuff, enough to get something on tape and things like that, but I mean, just the social skills. I was a kid, and I was,
right.
So a total nerd, and it just sort of taught me some social skills, at least dealing with sessions.
Right. So you come out of that feeling like, okay, this is how you make records, not just how you record stuff.
Yes.
But did you know well, I mean, did other people realize sort of early on that you had a ridiculous talent for the sonics of this?
I don't like to brag, but
Go on.
I brought these tapes. Everybody who was in the recording workshop course is usually, I went there 2 years in a row, and there's usually like 15 or 20 people. And the first year, this is the first time I met Phil Ramone. Of course, he was an idol. There's, some great, great sounding stuff he did at the time. And so everybody had to play their tape, and he sort of stopped me. He goes, you listen to what this kid's got. He made this on the most primitive equipment known to man. And it sounds great.
Wow. And I mean, obviously, you must have gotten lucky with the acoustics in the basement and stuff like that. But it's like, Rudy Van Gelder. It was all in his living room. So it's not like, you had to be at A&R or a studio like that to do amazing work.
My room pretty much had almost no acoustics. What could you do with a room that small? It just had to be dead.
Right.
Yeah.
But you obviously had
and there were things that were working for me at the time that I had absolutely no idea why they did, but they did. As I said, it was in half the basement, and there was just a 2x4 wall and sheetrock and wood paneling that was popular in the 60s, and then those acoustic tiles with the holes on it.
Right.
But what I didn't realize is that wall was a big diaphragmatic absorber, so I didn't have too much of a low end problem in that room.
Right.
Two of the walls were two of the walls were just over the concrete walls, and then two were inside walls.
Right.
And just the way they were, let a lot of low end through, and it didn't get back that much. But there's so much junk in the other side of the basement that it was like a giant trap.
With a big diffuser behind it.
Yeah, which I didn't really know at the time, but
yeah, funny. And so, like microphones, what were you using for mics back then?
I had a bunch of Electro Voice. I had some RE15s. I had some a lot of AKG D1000s. I had a few of those.
Right.
And I had some Sony C22s, ECM22s. Remember their first little electret condenser mic?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It was like $100 back then. You put a 9-volt battery in.
Yeah.
So I had those. I used those for a while. And then the same guy, Bill Dangler, who lent me that Scully machine, lent me a pair of U67s when he wasn't using them.
Good God.
That was later on. That was like around 70, when I had the 4-track in that.
That must have been life-changing, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, a real, like, a moment when you realize that it does make a difference.
Yeah, and that was so sad. We had, later on, I had a few really nice mics like that were, and I went in, I went in with some other guys in the studio later on. This is after the basement. And we had some great mics because Bill was in that. So we had two 67s. Then we got two more 67s at an auction in Buffalo from some video place. We had a 48A, which is like a 47, but cardioid and figure 8 instead of cardioid and omni. And we had some Telefunken M251s. And I loved them. I knew they were great, but back then they weren't really worth anything. Right. And I owned some of them, in the studio owned some of them, and I sold them all to the rest of the guys cheap when I moved to LA in 78. And oh man, it still kick myself for that.
Yeah.
2 of the 67s were mine and the 48A was mine. So
wow.
But anyways.
But that's just, everybody's done that. I could have bought Apple stock when it was at 11.
A few years later, when they were worth something, one of the guys left at the studio and said, there's too much trouble. He won all solid state mics, and he sold all his stuff to Bill Schnee for like $250 a piece.
You're joking.
That was still in, I think, very early 80s.
Right.
I don't know how much the stuff was worth then, but.
Right, but still. Yeah, but there's so many stories like that. The whole Abbey Road outboard gear going in the skip.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, all right, well, let's get you from 1970-ish, where you're working with Chuck more, and how does that then get to the point where you're moving to LA in 78?
Okay, well, for a while I had this studio. I wasn't, with a few other guys. It was, a commercial studio. I just want to. There's a few years of a bridge in there too. So, um, so we had the studio. It started out with just the same equipment I had in the basement with the Scully 4-track. Then it also had some, Ampex 350 and 440 machines in there. One of the guys involved was good with electronics and actually built the console with EQ and everything. It was straight. He didn't know consoles, but he knew electronics. It was the strangest looking thing. It was too tall. It was uncomfortable to sit at. The faders were too far apart, but it worked. So we had that for a few years until we got an MCI in there. But anyways, that was, did a lot of jingles, local bands. Trying to think if we had, there were some, a few records came out of there, but nothing, nothing earth shaking. And anyway, so it just, and I was still doing sound for Chuck Mangione at the time on the road and doing some recording for him at that studio. And then he signed with A&M Records and asked me if I wanted to come engineer for him. And so he told me that we're doing an album at A&M Studio, Studio A, which still exists, of course. Yeah. At the time, it was a lot bigger because I think some of the rooms there's a studio off to the side. There used to be these small mix rooms off to the side, and they enlarged those, and the studio became smaller, and it's got an ISO booth, but it was just a big open studio at that time. And we did in that one room, he wanted to do 40 pieces live, rhythm section, brass, woodwinds, strings, the whole works entirely live.
Wow.
And he goes, do you think you can handle it? And of course I thought, oh shit, I'm going to fuck this up really bad, but I'm not going to turn down the opportunity. That was in 1975.
In 75. So yeah. But leading up to that, were you happy with the studio in Rochester and just doing that and being part of the local scene, or did you always have it in your head you wanted to move?
No, I always wanted to get out.
Right.
I didn't know how.
Right.
It was, Rochester was changing. There wasn't, all these guys who were really great musicians from Eastman, a lot of them moved out, of course, to New York and LA. The live music scene, which was a really, really great jazz scene for a while in the 60s, and everything just sort of died out a little bit. Right now, I think it's coming back. They have a big music festival every summer, great artists and everything. And for a while in the 70s, it was not, I just wanted to get out of there.
And were you still going down to New York and visiting studios, or not?
No. That was early on. I wanted to see what was going on. When I went and visited studios, Capitol, Irv Joel at Capitol, he was the guy who taught me the most. It was great to meet him. And then, after the recording workshop, I'd go to A&R and check out.
Right.
Matt Elliott Shiner showed me around when he was Phil's assistant. That's
nice.
How long ago that was.
Wow. And did you try to get a job there, or just didn't happen?
No. I was too insecure to move out of Rochester at the time. It was like a comfort zone. Yeah. I wanted to get out, but I didn't. No one offered me a job, and I didn't really ask. I can't tell you why. I don't really know why. I think New York was just too
I know
big
what you mean, though. It's like the Chuck Mangione session is the perfect, this is an actual thing to go do, as opposed to I'm just going to uproot and move.
Yeah. So we did that album in 75 and, got to meet lots of people at A&M, and it was such a cool time. It was the first time I was in a major studio for more than just a couple hours talking to people. So, met everybody there, and just so many musicians on the session. Everything said, hey, you should move out here. You do good. So I went, I still lived in Rochester, of course, when we did that session. Then I went back, I did more stuff on the road. Then in 76, we did another orchestra album called Bella Via. Then we did an album. I went with Chuck for a long time. Went to New York and did an album called Main Squeeze at Electric Lady.
Right.
In the little studio in back. And that was a fun thing because he didn't have his own band at the time. And it was Steve Gadd on drums, Tony Levin on bass, let's see, John Tropea and Jeff Mironov played guitar.
Wow.
Richard T was on B3. Don Grolnick on Rhodes.
Man.
And it was like an amazing rhythm section. So that was at 76, I think. And then the next album, we went out to LA, and that was the Feel So Good album, which was the big one. That's
Gigantic. Gigantic.
Yeah.
For the young kids watching this, if you don't know that track, it's hard to describe how huge it was.
Yeah, we did that, I think, in August 77. It was either 76, no, August 77, I think, we did that album. And that was at Kendon Recorders, which is now, what is it called? It's called Glenwood Place Studios.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah, the room that's the Hidley room.
Mm-hmm.
There's two rooms, one on each side of the courtyard.
Yeah.
And it's the one, as you're going into the courtyard, it's the one on the left side, the Hidley room. And it was fun. I liked that room because it was a fairly dead room, but very well bass trapped. And then half of it, there was sliding glass doors, and half of it was a very live room. So you could do all sorts of stuff, like record stuff in the live or the dead thing, partially open the doors, do stuff. They had at this time it was a Harrison 3232 console. And this is the first time I saw a console with semi-parametric EQ and that many sends and inline monitoring.
Right.
And I thought that thing was the coolest thing in the world.
So what was at A&M when you went in 75?
Oh, okay. That was a Heiko console. It was built before there were, commercial consoles.
Yeah.
It was either 24 or 32 inputs. It was a very good sounding console. I guess they had very nice transformers because it sounded very thick. And the only thing weird about that console is it had these tiny little 60 millimeter faders instead of big faders. But,
so what was the first day of that session like when you show up and you got 40 musicians in there, and like how'd that go?
Well, first I went to the studio before, and then I talked to engineers there, how they set up the room, and, got some advice, and then went back to the hotel and sort of drew a plan about, a mic list and, where we were going to put everybody, and then just set it up and,
And it worked.
Yeah.
Man.
I mean, lots of leakage. Definitely not a tight sound on the rhythm section at all because the string. There was more in the string mics than strings. But,
yeah, I mean, even with a big room, 40 people, it's going to leak.
Yeah, yeah. But it was nice leakage. It was nice sounding.
Yeah, and so did that sort of cement your confidence in your ability to do it, or you were already okay?
Yeah, it yes and no, it did. But then I'd listen to other guys who are more established records, and they sounded so good to me, and the stuff I did sort of sounded shitty to me. So I don't know. It just was, I was a little insecure about it, but I loved it.
Right.
And one thing we did, I think it was either on that album or the next one, we mixed it in one of those little mix rooms they had, and it had another Heiko console, and there was no automation at that time, but they had this quad 8 automation thing that nobody used. It was like a set of faders and VCAs, and it would go between the tape machine and the console, and you'd set it on the faders and be able to automate stuff. So I was playing with that.
Right.
And ended up, using some channels through it and then some through the console because they sounded better than going through those old VCAs. But, so that was sort of fun. They said, "Oh, nobody's ever done this here before." So
and was it tape based? Was it tape based? Where you
yeah,
had to bounce
it was a code it put on the tape. Not SMPTE, but it had its own code. You put it on the tape, and it would and when you play it back, it would play back the moves. And if you wanted to edit your automation, you had to copy that code through the automation system to another track.
Yeah, and it would get a little bit late.
Yeah, it would keep getting a little bit late. And then, so, I mean, I never used it like that. I used it more like to do a whole bunch of stuff at once.
Right.
And then punch in and do a whole bunch of other stuff, and then work on, work on other things manually. That was also, just as an aside, in the 80s, Bruce Swedien used to use the Harrison automation system, which was Allison, which was very similar.
Mhm.
And what he did is he'd have a separate 8-track 1-inch machine running in sync with the master, and he'd have the automation code on that and copy from one track to another. He could save several passes, and when he copied, all they do is, if they had to go a few passes, just offset the machine a little bit.
Brilliant. I'd never heard that.
Yeah, I think that's like I was hired by Sony once to do surround mixes of Thriller, which never came out. It was fun, and I'm proud of it. But anyways, so they transferred all the analog masters to the 48-track digital, even including the automation tracks for the 8-track.
Which I'm assuming you did not use.
No, couldn't use. I had the Sony Oxford at the time. It could not talk to those.
Wow. That's amazing. So once you're making records and you're in studios and this is all happening, did you then have any mentors at that point, or it's still just showing up, talking to people, but going off and doing your own projects?
Yeah, pretty much that. I mean, I of course, talked to other engineers and producers, and I mean, well, that was 78 when I moved to LA. Before that, I met people at A&M. The first session there, that first orchestra I told you, I met so many people. I met Tommy Vaccari then. He was engineering the guy from Montreal. What's his name? Gino Vanelli.
Oh, right.
Remember how great those records sounded. So, yeah. I mean, that was like inspiration meeting him. And then I met Henry Louis, who was producing Joni Mitchell across the hall. And there's all these sessions going on. Like there was they just finished the Gino Vanelli album, or the second one that Tommy was doing, and so sort of met him on when they were finishing that. They were doing a Joni Mitchell album in Studio C with Henry Louis, so met him. Then the Carpenters were in Studio. No, was that Studio D? That might have been later on. That was later on, the second time I came back. But Captain and Tennille were there, they recording that big hit, and they were unknown at the time, and they were just hanging out. And
wow,
I mean, they're working on the record and hanging out. But that was one of the biggest records in that.
Huge.
70s. Love Will Keep Us Together.
Yeah,
but they were there doing that. So I mean, I was so happy and so crazed, and I loved LA back at that time. It was so different. Traffic jams weren't a big thing. It was I don't know. I mean, I just fell in love with LA and just moved there within the next couple of years. And
right,
not there anymore.
And were Chuck's albums self-produced, or was there another producer on those?
No, it was him. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, so where from there do we go?
Well, so you've just moved to LA, so let's talk about when you're actually living there instead of just flying in doing sessions.
Well, Feels So Good was before I moved to LA.
Right.
I go to LA a lot. Okay, so it was just like when I wasn't doing something, I got totally sick of doing sound on the road. We just had a kid at the time. Because I was married in like 76, and we had our son in 77. I just didn't want to be on the road so much anymore. And I started knowing enough people in LA, and so I moved. We moved out there. I didn't do too much for Chuck there, because I didn't do the road sound. It was like he just more like wanted a guy who did all the audio, So,
Right.
So sort of pass that off to a friend of mine, and I worked as a tech at Larrabee Sound when it was on Santa Monica and Larrabee.
Right.
I worked there as a tech and a recording engineer, so I could just sort of be in the studio and get gigs. And I did. I got some gigs and stuff there, and things were pretty good. And then a friend of mine, Jim Fitzpatrick, was the head tech at the time at Westlake, and he was from upstate New York, from Syracuse, so we knew each other. He did sound for bands and stuff then, and was into audio, and so he heard I was in town, and he called me. So I went over to Westlake, and I was never on staff there or anything, but I just was always there. So did some Mangione stuff there. Did did a bunch of records there. And anyways, and this is really the big turning point in my career. Was that as like in I think 80, 81. I met James Newton Howard, who was producing this album for this band called DFK, Dudek Finnegan Krieger, great musicians and stuff. And we started talking because this was before he was a film composer.
Yeah.
He was a record producer. So we started talking, and I told him how much I loved this record, this Valerie Carter record that he produced and that Bill Schnee engineered, and it was just a beautiful record. And so we got talking, and then the band he was, DFK band, Andy Johns was engineering that, and he got double booked one night. So James said, "Hey, you want to do this overdub session?" So yeah, of course, this would be fun. And just an aside, the band DFK was on Arc Records, which was Earth, Wind, and Fire's label.
Right.
George Massenburg was very tightly involved with them because he was part of the label actually, and he was did all Earth, Wind, and Fire's engineering. So I thought, and I knew this, so I thought I'm going to do this overdub session, and I'm going to make the best rough mix I possibly can. I know Massenburg is going to hear this. And James, and of course James is too, and I wanted to be more gigs. So I spent couple hours doing a really nice rough mix of it, and then Massenburg heard it. They called me down to the offices of Arc Records and said, "Hey, you want to you want to be involved?" I wasn't on staff for him or anything, but I mean I was a guy they used. So I did a few projects for them, and then this was just over a period of a few months, and then George started designing his automation system. I don't know if you know about it. He had an automation system that was really, for its time in 82, 83, around there, was the most advanced system.
Yeah.
It was really nice. I mean, it didn't matter where you stop and start. You didn't have to do a pass. It's like, sort of like the fader automation of Pro Tools now. But it was a great system. But he's spending all his time in that, and he didn't want to engineer Earth, Wind, and Fire anymore. So I got into that. I ended up not being the only engineer, because there were several people on the projects. Maurice had 2 studios going, but I did most of the work on the album with Let's Groove Tonight, the Reggae album. So that's really what started my, that took everything to a whole other level.
Right. So at that point, it was like, okay, now I'm doing this for a living. All good.
Yeah.
So did you stop teching at that point?
Yes and no. I've always been interested in that. I've built stuff just for the hell of it since then and everything. But no, I'm not. I was never a professional tech after that. We did one little cool thing during the Earth, Wind, and Fire. I think it was the album after that. There was another one in the early 80s. The AMS 1580, the dual delay line harmonizer.
Yeah.
And where you can put a sound in memory and and trigger it out. The early ones, you could put audio in the memory and you could press the pound key and it would come out, but you couldn't trigger it. So what we did, myself and the tech from the complex, the Earth, Wind, and Fire studio, we wired an opto isolator, the LED, across the -6, -12 LED on the input meter, and the transistor across the switch, the pound switch. So we had the first 1580 that could trigger, but it wasn't optimized for it. It had a 57 millisecond delay. And we were trying to replace drums. So what we'd have to do is turn the tape over, put it in repro, record the tracks on other tracks, then turn it back over and put
delay
those through a delay, and then So that was the first of that, and then no big technological feat, but it was fun. It was
no, but it's I think what maybe gets past people is it's not, okay, technologically compared to now, like that's nothing. But first of all, it's a big deal to figure out how you could even do that. But it's coming up with the idea that, hold on a second, I want to trigger this thing. You know, it's I want this to be something to reinforce my drums, and it needs to play on every kick drum, and how are we going to make that happen? And you make it up out of thin air. I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah, right. Then there was another thing, in that time period that I built that was because nothing like that existed then in the early '80s, is the problem you get with a lot of female singers is, sounding really beautiful and smooth, but then when they belt, that 3K just comes up and, So I made this little device. It was basically one band of a parametric equalizer, and that band of equalizer fed a compressor and then summed back with the input. You could solo it, so you have this parametric filter. You could tune to the problem frequency, you solo it and everything, and then switch it back in, and then adjust how much total cut you could get at that frequency.
Wow!
So I built that from the ground up in the shop at Westlake when I was doing a session that needed it.
Amazing. So an active EQ in hardware.
I mean, now they're all over the place, but back then,
they're all over the place digitally. But like, I'm trying to think of. I mean, I suppose like some of the BSS stuff. Like there were a couple of boxes.
Siren, that was the only one I knew of. But that's
later. It. Yeah, exactly. No one did. I mean, de-essers are the only thing that's even slightly like that. And so, man, it's taken until the digital age for people to realize that you need that at different frequencies and different kinds of triggers. That's amazing.
My favorite now is the Fab Filter multiband compressor for that.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's, you might not build one of those in your spare time.
I'm digitally retarded. I'm like, I never really learned. I mean, I know a little bit about coding, but I could never ever design an audio circuit and leave that to other people. I think it's in a way, one of my pet peeves with the industry, I mean, not the recording industry as much as the manufacturing industry, is that back in the days of analog gear, and they don't even do this with analog gear anymore, they'd always provide a service manual and schematics. Mm-hmm. And I'd say that was the way I learned mostly about electronics, is just to see, just to analyze a circuit and see how it was done from a schematic. And now everything is so secretive and every little thing has to be monetized that unless you go for a formal education, you just can't pick up a lot of this stuff.
No, well, like the 2520.
Maybe a lot of the young kids can, but I'm an old fart. And
I don't think they can either. But I mean, all the way back to the 2520 you were talking about, which is the API custom. It's a discrete amplifier, basically.
Yeah.
And those were always in boxes full of goo, and you were never going to know what was in there.
Oh, but they provided the schematics.
Yeah,
there were schematics
at first. Yeah. But now it's back to being super secret. You can only buy it from them. It's Yeah, absolutely. It's
the Jensen 990, which I think is better, anyways, has always been open source.
Right. Of open source, like true open source hardware.
Yeah, the 990, the schematic is published, and different companies make them. It's total open source electronics. And
funny.
I'm for everybody making a good living on this, but I wish they weren't so secretive about technology that would help people. I mean, especially this digital technology. There's so much that could be learned without a formal education if they were, if everything you read about a piece of gear or a piece of software wasn't just marketing hype.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it didn't used to be like that. Professional equipment wasn't like that. You bought a Pultec and there was a schematic and every, full service manual. And it's just, even consoles then. You get a Neve or an SSL. Full schematics.
Oh, absolutely. And they're like phone books. Yeah. Huge.
They don't do that at all anymore.
But I think part of it is also there was no such thing as consumer versions of these things. Like they were selling to businesses who were using it to, it's not, no one's going to knock it off. There was no name your favorite company that knocks stuff off that existed then. But, well, I mean, but that's not true either, because, Lang basically was copying the passive EQ circuit of the Pultec and just not doing tube gain. They're doing solid state. So,
Right.
Yeah, it was happening.
Yeah.
It was happening, but yeah. Oh, well.
Even though the Lang and the Pultec sound entirely different. So
Yeah. Yeah,
Both
and to
very
be
useful.
honest, I love Pultec plugins, but I like Lang hardware better than Pultec hardware for the most part.
I agree with you, because the Pultec 15K boost, medium Q there's nothing like it in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing, some of this stuff. So, all right. So we got you to LA. You started working for Earth, Wind & Fire. Now, in 81, and this is the problem with your discography, is you've done so much like surround mixing or reissues or things that I have no idea whether you work on these albums when they happen or whether you've gone back. Like Thriller, you just are listed as a mixer on Thriller. But of course, that was Bruce, but you did the surround mix, which you're saying didn't even come out, right?
Which never came out because it happened right when we were like halfway through it, is when the whole battle between Michael and Tommy Mottola about Tommy Mottola being the devil. That whole shit was going down.
Right.
So
it's weird that there's actually a mixing credit for you floating out there for Thriller. So
yeah, for that surround, and it was
somebody knows.
I still have those. We never even finished it. But
and were you doing 5.1?
Yeah, 5.1.
Yeah. So maybe you'll be doing it in Atmos. Who knows?
That would be nice. Yeah, I haven't done any Atmos mixing at all, and the little bit I looked at, I mean, it's interesting. I'm not sure in most cases how it's going to improve anything for music. Having the height channels, because I really thought 5.1 was a nice format for music, and I mean, Atmos will be fun. The thing is the little bit I've seen of it, it sort of locks you into that object-based thing where you have your surround mix and then you have these objects you can move around, and I don't know. I'd have to get used to that.
Yeah, we can talk. Yeah, there are ways to ignore some of that as well and make it act like...
I assumed there were.
Yeah.
Because at least when I thought you couldn't, because when you do a surround mix, I wouldn't look at it like, say, take a mono signal and put it there. I would say have a mono signal there or a stereo signal, between a couple tracks, then the effects of it moving somewhere else and things like that. And it was, just do it from the ground up. I thought was an easier way to do it.
Yeah. And you still can do it that way, but... All right.
I'll have to try that sometime. Nobody's ever called me to do it, and I'm just saying that, being an old fart now, I'm not, I don't go bugging people for gigs and things. So it's
well, I wouldn't think that you have to bug people for gigs.
I think I do. I should. I'll get into it again. I was so busy for a long time that now I'm just like happy doing nothing for a while. I mean, I'm doing gigs, but
you're doing. Look, it's rolling your discography forward. Already this year, you've got Sting and The Weeknd out. So I think you're.
What? I don't think I worked on either of those.
You did something. I mean, how about that? You're getting credits and you're not even working on this stuff. Oh, you know what? Maybe they're sampling. That could be. All right.
Yeah, everybody samples Earth, Wind & Fire.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to 81 to one of these credits, because you've got a credit on a Prince album, Controversy. Did you work on that at Westlake?
Yeah. Yes. No, at Westlake, there was Hollywood Sound.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a great credit. Everybody asked me about it, but I really didn't do that much on it. It was, Prince's early days, and he, oh shit, I just lost you here. Hold on, I just lost the video. Got you back. Okay.
There I am.
So anyways, he just wanted somebody to engineer and, get sounds, get effects and things. And then he'd throw everybody out of the control room and work himself for hours and just wait out. Me and the system would just wait out in the lobby, hang out while he played. The only thing I did interacting with, would work with him getting the sounds, but then he'd like to do it himself. And then the only time I was really in the studio recording it was when he was playing drums.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so it was that's the kind of gig it was. I mean, it was fun. It's great credit. It was. I wish I could have done more on it.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, if you got the sounds, you got the sounds. So
Yeah,
that's something. That's something.
yeah,
Now, were
yeah.
you at the Westlake on Beverly as well?
Mostly the one in
Because
Beverly.
I might be completely misremembering this, but I seem to remember there is some history of you and remote control cars in that alley
Yes.
behind Westlake.
Oh, all over the yeah. Yeah, there was that. Oh, we anything. I mean, back in those days, it was like whenever we weren't working, there would be some kind of prank going on in at Westlake. It was because there's quite a few upstate New York guys
Yeah.
working there, and you know how we are.
Well, do we need to hear about any of these pranks, or this is all sealed documents?
Some of them should be sealed. The remote controlled cars chasing people it was chasing people on the sidewalk in Beverly Boulevard, but that was a mild one. There were some other ones that that can't be talked about.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, and they also, in the hallway, that was where they had the cork panels, and you could get stuff to stick in the panels pretty well,
Yeah.
too, right? There was a,
Yeah. Oh, one day we took a took a plastic reel, a 7-inch or 5-inch plastic reel, and we put tape around a Dremel tool. And those things get up to 30,000 RPM. And we put the reel on it and got this thing going so fast. And then took a pencil and pushed the reel off, and it like it skidded on the floor, just spinning for a while. Then it gained traction and took off, went down the hall, and hit the door jamb of the little tiny lounge they had back there and shattered into a million pieces. And I forgot who it was. It was a producer of some session going, I was on the phone and there go, what the fuck?
surprised you didn't get kicked out.
No. Fitz pretty much ran the place back then.
Right.
The Beverly one, yeah. And I mean, and he was always up for a prank. I mean, we
Nice. Okay, so look, I was started by just making a gigantic list of credits, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to just like, oh, and then you worked on this record. What was that like? But let's get you sort of in through the 80s, because there's so much stuff that starts happening there. I mean, there's like in 84, Berlin, Streisand, and Neil Diamond. 85 is Stevie Nicks and the Motels, then Michael McDonald, and then there's a Talking Heads credit in the middle of that. So what I'd love to do is for you to you tell me the story of that kind of era. Once things, you do the Earth, Wind, and Fire stuff. So this is really cementing you as like, hey, you're one of the guys now. So what happened? Tell the kids what happened.
Well, I mean, after Earth, Wind, and Fire, I just started, people started calling. I'd get more gigs, meet people in the studio. You just let me know which project you want to hear about, and I'll tell you.
Well, I mean,
if I can remember, what the 80s are like.
Yeah, well, I've heard tell. I mean, I'm a huge Talking Heads fan, so I would love to hear about that.
I'll tell you that. Okay. Right. I mixed 2 songs for them. Was Wildlife and Wildlife and I think Love for Sale. And it just David Byrne just called one day and just asked if I could mix a couple songs, and I said, yeah, I'd love to. I mean, that was definitely something I really wanted to do. So anyways, he said he'd be ready that night, and I was at Conway, did that at Conway, and he came with 24-track tape. Well, it was probably like 7, 8 at night, dropped it off and said, yeah, you mix this? And I go, yeah, I can. I'll work tonight. I'll have it ready in the morning. I go, you want me to call you and come hear it? This is before, of course, being able to do things online. He goes, nah, I trust you. So
what?
Mixed. Yeah, that was it. He dropped the tape off, talked about it for a little while, and then I mixed. That's Wildlife. It was 2 days. I did one day and one another day. I used to like to work at night because the phones weren't ringing and stuff. So, and also he wanted, he was ready that night, so it was perfect like that. So I worked till the sun came up, did that mix, and that was it.
So you just did the mix, printed it, moved on.
Yeah. I asked her if he wanted to hear it. I go, is there any changes or anything? I could leave it up for a little while. No.
That's amazing.
He didn't even come back and listen. I just sent it to him.
Wow.
Sent it to him.
That's nuts. I could go for some gigs like that.
That's probably the only gig I've had like that.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, so we talk about Neil Diamond for a little bit. Because had he built his studio yet? Not built, but because he took over his studio. But
now there's a whole bunch of records that I worked on when Burt Bacharach was producing.
Right.
And that was the Neil Diamond record, the Streisand. Well, Streisand record was interesting because Burt Bacharach was producing some of it and Phil Ramone was producing some of it. And we were at Conway, both studios going. And I'd go back and forth. I mean, there were other engineers too, but, so I did a whole bunch of stuff for Burt Bacharach, and a lot of them were huge hits.
And how did that start? How'd you meet Burt and end up being his guy?
Denny Diante, who was an A&R guy at Epic in Columbia then. I used to do some work for him, and he recommended me to Burt. And I think it was the first thing I did for Burt was, the first thing may have been the biggest. It was That's What Friends Are For.
Wow.
That was a fun session. It was like live rhythm section. It was John Robinson on drums, Neil Steubenhaus on bass, Robbie Buchanan on keyboards, Dan Huff on guitar, and there might have been other people involved in that. But it was a live rhythm section. Dionne Warwick was in the booth saying rough vocal live, and then then after some overdubs, then they started getting different artists. And I mean, there were some artists that were recorded that weren't on the record, and some that they got afterwards and everything. But everybody was separate. I remember having to go in the studio Sunday because it was the only time Elton John could make it to do his overdub. So we go there Sunday morning, and just me and Richard, the assistant, and Elton shows up and does his track. That was a treat. That was fun. Man. Stevie Wonder, that was a great session. I wish I had some of the outtakes. Oh, you got your cat? I got a black cat just like that.
Yeah, Mole, who refuses to stop climbing on the modular synth, which is a bit of a problem. But other than that, he's a good guy.
Yeah. Yeah, we got 2 black cats and a big fluffy cat.
Nice.
So anyways, where was I before that? The Stevie Wonder session on that was great. He played harmonica and did his vocal on that. And then at the end of the song, in that chorus where they're just repeating "That's What Friends Are For," he's on the mic going, "Can I borrow some money? Can I borrow your car?"
Nice.
Yeah, I have fond memories of that session. It was good. And then the one with Michael McDonald and Patti LaBelle, that was another big one.
Man. Yeah, it's a good time to be working for Burt. Not that there's ever a bad time, but that's one of the better times, I would think.
Yeah, and he was such a nice guy to work for.
And again, the credits are just sort of insane, but they're things that kind of stick out a little bit, but I don't want to jump ahead too much unless, you got to tell me sort of where we're landmarking, because hearing about the sessions that are a big deal are like, that's the point. It's like what kind of, because looking at the credits, you could think, oh, well, that's a big deal, but it turns out that's just one of 12 records you were working on that month or something like that. So, the things were, well, when did you mix from the beginning some of the stuff you were tracking, or when did that start being a thing for you?
Well, I used to mix and track. That's really how I thought it was done.
And it's kind of how it was done when you started out.
In the early days. But then, on the Earth, Wind, and Fire records, there were a few people involved. Tom Perry was doing a lot of stuff then. So, we'd both be mixing. I do some songs, he'd do some. Everybody who was involved was recording and mixing, really.
Right. If you were the last one in the room for the last overdub, then you started mixing, basically.
Yeah, and then maybe you'd be on something somebody else would finish, or you'd take over somebody else. It was very collaborative. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't a competition thing at all. It was just it was fun. It was just,
And since you didn't really draw a distinction between it, did you ever feel like you enjoyed one thing more than the other, or it's all making records, so who cares?
I enjoyed working on the whole project more than just mixing, even though it sort of came to that. The first album I actually was just hired as a mixer for, or the first major one was Mr. Mister.
Right.
I didn't do Broken Wings on that album. Mike Shipley did that. And then I don't know if he was on another project or what, but they called me and did the rest of the album. That was fun. That was my first gig of just mixing.
Right. And did
Or
you
the first
like
major
that?
one.
Did you like that immediately, or was it weird to come into someone else's tracks?
Well, those are good tracks, and it was
Yeah.
and it was fun to go into. The problem, I remember the huge problem on that album was that there was something with a lot of low end right next to the Simpy track.
Oh boy.
Those tapes would not sync. Like, but so we had to like find a few things that we could move around to one track to free a track somewhere else in the tape, and then copy the Simpy to it filtered, and finally we got it. But I mean, it was like a day of messing around to get the things to sync before mixing.
Yeah, people who are nostalgic for the days of tape don't have any idea what they're talking about.
Oh, I know. Let's do an aside about that.
All right.
Oh, people are nostalgic for tape, some people say tape sounds better. And then there's plugins that generate hiss or saturation or anything. But that's not what I think is the main thing about the sound of tape. I think the main thing about the sound of tape has not been, hasn't been successfully imitated. And what it is the migration of magnetism at low frequencies to adjacent tracks. Like you put up a 24 track and you'll hear all this rumbling and bass leaking, magnetically through the tape. And
right.
It's just this, it's not hit. The hiss wasn't that much, on the newer tapes, but it was like, there was this whole thing that sort of became a glue. It was like almost like a room.
Right. Yeah, because it wouldn't only be adjacent tracks; it was also print through, which of course you'd hear it. I mean, and it's very famously on some records.
Yeah.
But the low frequency stuff was just sort of everywhere. And yeah, that's interesting. That would be. I mean, how are you going to possibly recreate?
Right.
that?
I mean, you can filter, but there's still it extended up. And it was. But I mean, I think that was part of the sound of tape, and I think, I'm not crazy about that sound, but I mean, I can see where a lot of people would like it, because if you're recording, like you do now with almost everything direct and synthesized, it was almost your room. As the dude said, it really tied the room together.
Yeah. It does tie the room together. But and it's like the session, the first session you did in LA where you're talking about the bleed in the microphones. It's having a single sound source captured in more than one way. It shows up in more than one way. And obviously it can make life difficult, but it is also, there is something in that chaos that is more like what you hear in a room.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm fine with that aside, but I did not particularly enjoy the synchronization part.
No, me neither. No. And I didn't enjoy the deterioration of it too. It's like when you record something, well, even immediately you listen off the console and you go, wow. Then you listen off the tape and it's a little muddier, and then you put the tape back up a few days later and it's worse.
Yeah. And if you had a project which could afford it, you'd cut the basic tracks and then never play that tape again until you were going to mix.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've had that conversation with pretty much everybody about the getting drum sounds in input, recording a bit, and just getting depressed. And okay, right, I forgot about all that. And there's some people it never really bothered, but most people, because you get these transients that cannot survive tape. It just can't happen. And you're never going to see it on a VU meter, so you think you're fine, but...
Yeah, and then those transients, when they disappear, it's like, where's that magnetism going to go? It doesn't just go nowhere. It goes.
It
spherically migrates and makes things muddier.
Yeah, and the fact that, just talking, nerd to nerd here, the fact that when you're biasing the tape machine, all you're doing is compromising between distortion and getting the stuff to just stay on the damn tape. I mean, there's no good solution to that. You're just always somewhere in the middle. But
Yeah.
All right, enough about this. Is old grumpy guys talk about old grumpy technology.
Yeah. Oh, I know, but I like it because I like newer guys who haven't experienced it to know, that it wasn't all great back then.
Yeah, I mean, look, and it did some stuff for you. There's certain things that did sound great coming back off tape, but it's not everything. And I think, when we get to it, the Daft Punk record is a great example of that, because you guys tried everything every way possible and did not always choose tape.
Right.
But sometimes you did.
Right. And tape was chosen for the half-inch mixes were always used. Even though most of the album was recorded Pro Tools, but it was all mixed to half-inch tape.
Oh, really? So those were always gone? Because there was one interview you were talking about, you printed to quarter-inch and half-inch, and I think to digital as well. But so they took the half-inch mixes every time?
There weren't quarter-inch. There was, should we start talking about that album?
Well, what the hell? We'll skip it. I mean, we've just skipped everything to do with New York, but we'll come back to it.
Okay, yeah. So anyways, that album was recorded. We recorded everything in Pro Tools 96K, and on some of the sessions we recorded also to a Studer A827, and I think they wanted to run that at 15 nips because they wanted, if we want tape, we want the saturation.
Right, make it obvious.
But we didn't want noise, so we had Dolby SR on that machine too, which. I don't know. Looking back on it, I'm not sure whether we should have or not, because it does affect the transient response to an extent. But anyways, so when we were tracking, we were tracking to Pro Tools, the live band, and then through this Studer, we had two SR racks, one for record, one playback, rather than switching them, so we could keep the machine in repro and record those analog tracks back to Pro Tools at the same time.
Right.
And then decide, which to use. Now, I wasn't in too much of the decision process. I mean, it was Tomas doing all of that. I mean, my impression of it was that the direct Pro Tools sounded better in pretty much every case, but they weren't looking for, in every case, really tight, precise sound. So I know they may have used some of that. You couldn't really combine them very well, because just the tiny bit of flutter and wow of the analog machine. If you say took a cymbal track from Pro Tools and from the analog, even if you lined it up as well as you could,
it was going to phase.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, there was that part of it, and then they wanted to mix to analog tape, and we had 3 half-inch machines, and they wanted to check, see which ones they like better for which songs. One was running at 15 nips, and it had that Aria electronics on it. It was ATR with the Aria electronics running at 15. And then we had a stock ATR 102 running at 30, and then an ATR 102 with the high fluxivity heads running at 30, and mixed to all 3 machines simultaneously. And they'd spend a long time after the mixes were done comparing the minute differences of the machines. We also mixed to Sonoma DSD,
right,
as a backup. Now that I loved the sound of that thing. It
really?
Wasn't DSD. It wasn't. It wasn't like it wasn't there. It had a sound to it, but it was a very detailed, very, I'd say it accentuated the high end, the small high end details without making anything harsh. And
right.
I love the sound of that, but I think they wanted to go for more nostalgic, analog.
And for the people watching who don't know, DSD, it's a really high sample rate, but don't think of it like the way you think of sample rates, because it's basically like a 1-bit encoding, just asking, what is it? They're 2.5 and 5.4 megahertz or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact numbers, but that many times a second, just saying, is it higher or lower? And that's it. Yeah. So it'll reconstruct the waveform on the fly, but it makes it very difficult to edit and blah, blah, blah.
Right,
but it's
because every sample is dependent
on where you were before. So
Yeah.
but it's a pretty fantastic format, and it's been around forever. I mean, well, not
Yeah.
forever, but it was around in early '80s
Yeah.
as an alternative to PCM recording. But I think the editing is where it fell down
Yeah.
and sort of went out of vogue. But it still exists, for 2-track recordings and things.
Yeah.
And then
there are multi tracks for it.
and Puremix
and
does a whole editing system with it as well.
Yeah, when you edit on Puremix, it transfers just that part that you're modifying to 384K PCM and then back.
I was wondering about that because I got exports from Puremix to mix something, and it was all 384 24-bit, and I assumed that there must be something. So that's how you edit then, right?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a PCM conversion, and then it goes back.
Right. All right. Let's go back to LA and talk about what I want to do is get you're in LA, you're quite established, and then the whole, how do you and Tommy Mottola meet? And how does that become a thing?
That was another huge change in my career, that was in '92. I mixed stuff for Michael Bolton for years, before that, and then Walter Afanasieff, who was doing a lot of work for Tommy, Bolton, Mariah, everything. He was producing an album for Michael Bolton, and Michael Bolton suggested that he use me to mix the album. So Walter called me, and so I went up to San Francisco. We were at Record Plant Sausalito. I mixed that album, and everybody was happy. Tommy heard it, so want you to do more work for me, and of course he wanted everybody close. He wanted me to move to New York, and I still liked being in LA at the time, and I really didn't want to move. And then when the earthquake hit in '94, I called him up. I said, "Hey, Tommy, is that offer still open?" And actually, I would have stuck it out in LA. I liked it, but my wife did not want to stay there, and also, I mean, it was a great opportunity. So Sony moved me to New York, and I ended up doing just a lot of stuff for Tommy, Mariah Carey records, and
I mean, a lot of gigantic records. Which I'd love to hear anything in particular you'd like to talk about. But were you? I mean, were you on an exclusive contract with Sony, or
I had a contract. It was something that would never happen today. It was great. I had an advance, an annual advance, and then but I would have to be available whenever they needed me, and I could do other gigs, but I just have to say, hey, do you guys need me? You want to do this gig, and and I get to do it. So it wasn't restrictive at all.
Right.
It was.
And did you immediately build your own studio in New York?
Fairly quickly, because Tommy wanted me to move up to Bedford area, which is about 40 miles north of New York, and because Tommy and Mariah, they were married at the time, and they lived up there, so they wanted me to live near there because they had a studio in their house that was unbelievable at the time. But they wanted me to be able to come over there and work, and it didn't really work out so much that way, because they split up not too far after that, and then also they worked in the city more. So I was actually in the city at Sony a lot more than I was at their house.
Right.
But the whole thing working on the Mariah records is, I get them mixed done, get things done, and then nobody would show up for days sometimes. And luckily I lived about a mile from there, so I'd just go home, and if they needed me, I'd come back. But I figured, hey, if I'm doing nothing for all this time, I'm going to build a studio at home.
Right.
And working for Sony, I could get gear at a really good discount. So I put the studio in the basement. I got a Sony 3348 because this is before you could do real multi-track on Pro Tools. And I got an SSL 4056G, but it had, I sort of got that on a long-term loan because I forgot, I think it was Lisa Roy. They knew I liked digital technology, and wasn't I was you know wasn't afraid of using it in the early days. And AT&T, um, Bell Labs at the time, AT&T, they were they had a guy there, a whole staff that was repurposing these, for the day, really high powered DSP computers that were for sonar analysis for audio. So they duplicated all the functions of this SSL console in this giant DSP rack, and they wanted people to use it. And I was at a couple studios. There was one at Conway for a while that they sent there. There was one at what's the name of the place in Nashville had one. And I used to go do some sessions there, and I'd use this thing, and I was about the only one who used it. So they thought I could make some use of it. So they lent me this SSL with this AT&T digital mixer core on it, and that's what I worked on from 95 to 99.
Wow.
And then they stopped that project, AT&T project, when it became Lucent Technologies, and I had to either buy the console or give it back. So I bought it and sold it because it was still SSLs were still worth something.
Right.
And I got through Sony, the Sony Oxford. I had that from 99 to 2012.
So how did this thing interface with the SSL?
It was it connected to the automation system. It read the automation system for the faders, and it read the recall information for all the other knobs on the console, and it digitally emulated everything.
Wow! So you would do the mix analog, but then it could recreate it digitally.
Well, I would listen. I would use the thing digital. I would use it digitally. Mainly, I tried that SSL a couple times. I mean, it was fine. The only thing is, it was, it wasn't. It needed some maintenance, which they didn't do because they were using it as a controller for this thing.
Right,
so
right.
Most of the time, I used the digital thing mainly because I was supposed to, because that's what they lent it to me for, and also because it was very reliable.
Wow.
And it didn't have its own automation. It followed the SSL automation. You couldn't use the SSL analog and this AT&T device at the same time because it would lock the SSL in recall mode.
Right.
So it would read the knobs. So if you ran analog audio through, there'd be all sorts of noise.
Oh, right. So you didn't have to take a snapshot and then play it back. It was constantly in snapshot mode, so you could EQ in real time using the knobs. Oh, right. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And the thing had a lot of latency because, it wasn't designed for audio originally. It was repurposed. But they did it intelligently where the fader controlled after all the EQ processing, after all the heavy lifting. So even though there was 60 milliseconds delay through it, there was any move you made was sort of at the end of that, at the tail end of that 60 milliseconds. So you wouldn't perceive any delay.
Right. Wow. And did it sound like an SSL?
Sort of. It was, I had the same EQ curves. It didn't sound exactly like it, but it was in some ways I liked it a little better. In some ways I didn't. But it was close, and it was close enough that I can't say, oh, I got to turn this analog, or oh, I got to do this digital to this thing. It was, it worked. It was one of those things. It was the first digital console, so it was sort of, they basically had this hardware but didn't have a control surface, so they used an SSL for it. I think they made Teclum or something, some for Neves and some for SSLs.
It's amazing that they would bother. So much stuff came out of Bell Labs that, why were they even doing that?
I don't know.
They must have had just an audio geek there who's like, man, this will work.
They had a guy named Russ Ham who was Gotham Audio he had, and I think he was the one who set it up or heard about this DSP that they had, and I don't know, sort of sold them on the idea, and they had several people, programmers and
It's amazing.
hardware guys.
And because it had to be
Yeah.
someone who understood like how the SSL did recalls and that you were going to be able to do this. I mean, there's so much
Yeah.
technology.
Well, they had audio guys. They had audio guys and they had programmers. I mean, it was. I actually went to Bell Labs a couple times before we did the deal with them, and it was an amazing place. I don't know what it is now.
Wow. What else were they working on?
They didn't show.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought so. Yeah. So then you move on to the Sony Oxford, and did you love that? Like, it sounds as though like you'll make anything work.
I loved the Sony Oxford.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, its automation is pretty much identical to Pro Tools, which I think is, the best automation right now. And so everything was automated on it. It was the faders were just the nicest feeling, most precise faders I've ever used. They were just like glass. They were, EQ was very nice. Dynamic section was usable for some things, but not really the greatest. But the layout of the console was really nice. Is that it had 48 faders, 24 on each side, and then it had 16. Actually 17 faders in the middle, 8 groups, then the master, and then another 8 groups. So and it was 120 inputs, and on each side, the 24 faders, you couldn't assign a specific track to a fader, but you had like a switch on each side that 1 through 24, 25 through 48, all the way up through 120. So you could put any group of 24 faders on either side, and when you attentioned the channel, there was on each side there was a panel that was your EQ, a panel that was dynamics, and a panel that was assigns and sends, and sends and stuff. So it was very easy to use. It was just you have all your faders, and then you just press a button, and you'd have your EQ and one knob per function, big input strip just arranged sideways, and it just became so intuitive and so comfortable to work. They stopped supporting it, and there were a lot of proprietary components, and it just was hard to keep working, and that's why I just went staying in Pro Tools after that.
Right. Well, and you must have loved it when the S6 showed up then, because that's...
Oh, I love the S6.
You're describing the S6, basically, layout-wise, that you could set it up almost identical to that.
Sort of, yeah. The S6 is some nicer things and some things I don't like as well. The S6, the layout mode is, I just love it, where you have all your tracks in that middle panel, and you just assign what you want to what fader you want, and then you save it as a layout. And then if you want to just modify that picture of a mix a little bit, you can just change something, save it to another layout. And then I always make VCA masters in Pro Tools and put them over to the left. And then I have audio subgroups in the middle, 16 faders. And then, that'll make up my stems later. And then on the left, all I do is attention a VCA, and all the tracks come up right in front of me. So it's a 32 channel surface. But I always lay it out with VCAs far left, and the middle 16 is my audio subgroups, but if I attention to VCA, the tracks for that VCA come there, and then on the right is any master stuff I have. So 32 faders works out perfect for me. And,
right.
The thing that I liked better about the Oxford was the one knob per function.
Right. Right. Dedicated stuff you knew it was going to be there.
Which you really can't do with Pro Tools, because every plugin's different. It will map to the there's four knobs, and four assignable in a pan pot on each channel, and the 4 knobs default to the first 4 sends. You can page through them, but you can also hit EQ, and there'll be 4 knobs of page VQ, and you can page through that. Then every channel has an expand button that, if, say, your EQ is just on these 4 faders, you can hit expand, and then the whole equalizer comes up on the 32 knobs, of that panel. But some are different than others, and it's not the most intuitive, easier thing to do. I'd rather do EQ on the screen.
Right.
and work with plugins on the screen. But I just got and trying out, and I'm really starting to love this thing, is this SSL UC1. It's a little controller that specifically controls their Channel Strip 2 plugin and their bus compressor.
Right.
And if you've ever seen the SSL C300, their digital console, remember they had the tiles?
Oh yeah.
And it was sort of like the Oxford. You would attend to the channel, and you'd have all your dynamics and EQ on this little panel. And this UC1 is a USB device. It has a knob per function input module and a bus compressor, and it just follows your SSL plugins. And I like the plugin. It's very intuitive.
Right.
Because well, so much of a mix. I mean, there's some channels that I want to really dig in with EQ, like use a fab filter or a parametric EQ with an analyzer and everything. But for the most things, I just sort of liked a console EQ. And now that I got this, I just got it and just tried a session with it yesterday, and it's really nice to have that knob per function thing.
Right.
And then add other plugins if I need to.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, then that's the thing. 90% of the stuff you're doing in a mix, you could do in 10 different ways, and it would be absolutely fine. And the other 10%, You're going to do it exactly how it needs to be, no matter what. So you're never going to do it based on convenience.
Right.
So, all right, well, let's
add some convenience. So this in the S6 I'm loving right now.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about the New York era some more, because obviously, I mean, these Mariah Carey records are gigantic. I seem to remember, and I can't remember if you came, because I was working on the Michael Jackson History record, and I think you came to Hit Factory while we were there, or were
yes.
you? Yeah, so you came in because you were.
With there.
Yeah, exactly with Bruce. But I mean, you were doing everything then, just on fire. So, is there anything in particular from that era that stands out to you, or?
Well, I like of the Mariah Carey stuff, the song "Hero." I really like the way that came out, and also that was probably the quickest mix too. We did that over at Right Track, and I think it was the first one I did for her. But it's just such a good song, such a good production. It just went together so nicely. So there's that. Did a lot of work for David Foster at the time too. Mm-hmm. That was, outside of Sony, that was real nice because I think Tony Braxton, "Unbreak My Heart" was one of my favorite sessions. That I did in my basement with the SSL AT&T.
Right. And did you kind of stop tracking during all this, or were you still recording?
Nobody called me for recording. I love tracking. I love tracking a live band, but I just didn't get calls for that. And all these records I was mixing weren't live bands. And really, I miss that. I mean, tracking sessions were a big treat for me, always. And, mixing is fun. Overdubs, I usually hated doing as an engineer.
A lot of engineers hate overdubs.
Well, it depends. Working, doing overdubs with a good vocalist or something was always fun, or a really virtuoso musician. But when you're just sitting there, engineering for keyboard parts, you're not really doing anything.
Yeah, so. Or the first of what is going to be 48 tracks of backgrounds. It doesn't matter how good they are. It's still.
Well, one time I had a really good time with that. It was doing a Michael Jackson session in Switzerland, in Montreux. And he was doing backgrounds, and it was the most amazing thing. He did 16 tracks backgrounds, so there were 4 parts, 4 tracks each.
Yeah.
He addressed the microphone slightly differently on each part, on each double, and changed his voice slightly. I mean, the guy was such a master, and he did it so quick, and it was so perfect.
Yeah. And the other thing I remember doing background vocals with him is when he wanted it to be this way, the vibrato would start at exactly the same point on every single track. They'd go up and down together and just perfect and just banging them out. I mean, I don't remember ever redoing anything.
I know. It was one take, everything.
God. Yeah.
Maybe 2 on a couple things.
I mean, he would, on lead vocals, he'd want to try stuff out and stuff like that. But backgrounds, he knew exactly what was going on and just knocked them out. I think, there is this sort of people realize how talented he is, maybe, but it's impossible to realize how talented he is until you're in the room watching him do it, or watching him beatbox an entire song to you that's in his head, and then watching people try and put it together for the next month, all based off this one little scat track.
Yeah.
So, all right. So in the middle of this, now, what I don't know exactly is, when did you stop working for Tommy and Sony and move?
When Tommy left Sony.
Okay. So what year is that?
2002, I think.
Right. So you're there for 8 years.
Yeah, 8 or 9 years. Yeah.
And once you had your studio set up at home for mixing, then you mentioned like you went to Right Track and mixed. Did you?
Well, no, that was before I had my studio.
Oh, so that was before. So once you had your studio, were you still fine to go other places and mix, or did you really want to just be in your place?
Because the Mariah records and some of the other Tommy records, they'd want me to do at Sony downtown. I mean, this whole thing with Tommy Place and and Mariah, that was all gone by then. But for my, after the, let's see, I'm trying to think. So 94 is when I started. I worked at their house quite a bit. And then I started my studio in 95. And I think 96 or 97, that aspect of it fell apart, with them, they split up and stuff. So I was I'd either be working at home or at Sony or at the Hit Factory.
Right. And you didn't mind going around, didn't make a difference? Because I'm like so comfortable at home that I get kind of freaked out trying to mix somewhere else.
Me too now, but back then I was still,
Yeah.
I did mixed Daft Punk album at Conway.
Right.
And I had a home studio then.
And that worked out.
Yeah. Well, Conway was my second home. I mean, from 1985 to like when I moved to New York, Conway was, I love that place. My favorite studio in the world.
Right. And 3 very different rooms too.
Yeah.
And did you bounce back and forth between the rooms? Didn't matter to you?
No, we were always in Studio C, the big room for Daft Punk.
Right. That's the SSL, the one furthest from the parking lot, right? Or is it the one right at the parking lot?
No, it's the one that fronts on Melrose Avenue.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
a big. It's farthest from the parking lot.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and they have a Neve 88R in there.
Right. Okay. These things, they change, and I don't go there. I never leave my house, so.
I don't either. Look, I live in Vegas now. Mainly because I mean, don't get me wrong, I still love working, I still love mixing, but I'm, just turned 70 this year, so I want to take it a little easy, and can't afford to live in LA and take it easy.
Right. So, you're in Vegas?
Yeah.
Why didn't I know that? That's so weird. I think last time we talked, you weren't, so that would be why I didn't know that.
Moved here December of 2020.
Right.
Yeah, because it's just, I mean, it's just, it's close to LA, easy to get back if I have to.
Yeah.
Never have, I'm not a gambler. I think I've been to the Strip 2 or 3 times since I've been here. We're on the far west side of town, northwest side. Never any traffic jams. You get about, I'd say, probably 3 times the house for the same money as you do in LA.
Right.
It's it's just it's an easier lifestyle, and I mean, I'm not into the Vegas scene really, but it's it's the closest city to LA that I would enjoy being in, I think.
Right. Interesting. Because I mean, and also I have heard that the food is insane there now. Like every good chef has a flagship restaurant there.
Yeah, you have to go down to the Strip for that, or at least that area.
Right.
There's a great area for food that's not like, not like famous chefs and real expensive. But there's a great Asian area of town, Spring Mountain Road. I mean, for miles, there's just these really good Asian restaurants, and they're incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. I assumed I was speaking to you from Woodland Hills, but no.
No.
Well, see, you moved during a pandemic, and so nobody would know because nobody else has left their house.
Right.
So, wow, amazing. So, okay, but before we get to the move to Vegas, let's get the move back. So when Tommy leaves Sony, you're obviously still just on fire as a mixer. I mean, you're doing gigantic records. Had you worked with Clapton at that point? Was that during that period?
That started in 97, 98.
Right. So during...
And went till about 2006 or 7.
Yeah. You made a bunch of records with him.
Yeah. Yeah, we did. Yeah, I didn't track any of that. It was all, I was just mixing. Yeah, we did a whole bunch. And then the one with Eric and B.B. King, that was a fun one. And all those records we did in 5.1 also.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I made a lot of live shows live DVD. So we did, the Cream reunion and the Hyde Park one and the Staples Center one.
Right.
So
right.
I did a lot. Yeah.
And you won a few Grammys in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all right. Why you don't have like 70 Grammys is beyond me, but it's...
I thought I was doing pretty good with 15.
Yeah, it's pretty damn good, but it's like, well, you know what it was? Al Schmidt was probably sucking them all up too. That's the problem. But yeah, 15. Yeah. Good God, man, that's good going. That is good going. So, all right, let me know if I've skipped over anything you want to talk about during the New York era.
Yeah, the New York area was mostly, working for Tommy and Sony, and then I do a lot of stuff for David Foster back then too. We did quite a few hits for him. I'm just trying to think. Then after that it was, the whole big readjustment in the music business. I wasn't all that busy. From like 2005 to 2011, I was working, but not. Yeah, I'm sure there's stuff in there I'm just not thinking of. And then Daft Punk was the next big thing. We started that 2012.
Right. So when Tommy left Sony, did you decide immediately to not stay in New York? Or like what was the thought process when he split?
Well, stayed there for a while because I was still working and, things were slowing down and stuff. And we were sort of in sort of a almost rural suburban area, and there was, unless we went into the city, there wasn't a lot going on. And then it's just, I didn't mind living there, but didn't like the winters, but didn't really mind living there. And then when the Daft Punk project came up, and I was going back and forth to LA quite a bit, and I thought it was time to move back.
Right.
That I working more and enjoying more, and I did. Moved back to LA in 2013 and stayed there till 2020, and then just figured I wanted to reduce the intensity of my life for so we moved to Vegas.
Nice. Well, all right, because people are going to ask questions, but let's spend some time talking about Daft Punk, because it's obviously a gigantic record. And you didn't record all of it because they went off and did some of the recording stuff, but you did all the basic tracks. You mixed
all the basic tracks, most of the overdubs, all the string sections, horn sections. Did all the live recording pretty much.
So let's talk about how that project came about, because it's like it is the perfect, like in some ways your entire career led up to that record.
Yeah. Okay, here's something that's, I don't know if you call it coincidence or just fate, how I got that project. A good friend of mine from back in Rochester, Chris Caswell, he's a keyboard player, and we knew each other, not when I had the basement studio, but the other studio, the early 70s. We worked together a lot. He'd produce like local things and jingles. We were good friends, and we, and then he moved to LA, I think in 75, a few years before I did. And we stayed in touch. And then he calls me, like, I think it was in 2011, saying, working with he met these Daft Punk guys at A&M, or, Henson it is now. They started doing some work together just informally. And then it just grew from there. And then they asked, do you know anybody who's an engineer who's done like classic R&B and disco kind of stuff? and knows live recording and knows how to work with a band and stuff. And he recommended me, and I had a meeting with him, and that's how it happened.
Right. And were they interested in any records in particular, or just at that point it was just about the vibe and was
just about the vibe? I mean, I think Earth, Wind, and Fire came up a lot.
Right.
But yeah, it was just the vibe, and started tracking, and it just worked out.
So the tracking for that album, you did like real rhythm section basic tracks, right?
Yes, it was. There were two drummers, different songs. John Robinson on some, Omar Hakim on some, Nathan East on bass. Chris played keyboards and most of it. Let's see, did we do live guitar? I think we did live guitar. I think that was mostly overdubs. Oh no, I think Paul Jackson was on some of the live sessions. It was a rhythm sections session, and they didn't really have the songs fully realized or written, but they had ideas, and so they would have the band, play a groove that they had an idea for, and then play it for a while, and then improvise on it, and it wouldn't even really be a song. And it just did tons of those things, and somehow they edited it all together and made the basis of the songs from that. Some parts were replaced, because I mean some things. The drum part would be right for it, but they'd want a different key and things. But it basically started from a live session, and then they created the songs by editing, really.
Wow, so like a gigantic multi-track sampling session.
Yeah, but it wasn't just little samples. It was whole.
Yeah, like big grooves, and so So they would have like a tempo and a feel and some sort of chord structure in mind to begin with.
They'd have a demo with the drum machine and keyboards and stuff, and
right.
For each thing, and then they'd have the band play that, and then just let them go, and then a lot of the great stuff happened that when the band was just playing.
Yeah, it's a good band. I mean, and I love the fact that, that list of musicians, I think other than Paul Jackson, you've already mentioned all those guys. Like, you've been recording those guys for 30 years already.
Yeah. So it was great. It was like a reunion.
Yeah. And then with
Paul Jackson, too. I did work with him a lot before.
Yeah, just his name didn't come up. But yeah, I mean, did
I mention Nathan East on that bass player?
Yeah. I mean, and obviously JR, I mean, he was playing on the Streisand stuff forever. Yeah. And so, yeah. And then, I mean, obviously, there's some pretty big guest people coming in now. Rogers is coming in and out, and
I didn't get to do that because they went to New York to his home studio to do that.
Right.
So a lot of the overdubs I didn't do, even though most of the overdubs that were in LA I did.
Right. Even though you hate overdubs.
Oh yeah, but it was fun with those guys because they would just it was just more like getting a sound, getting things going, and then hang out. And it was at Conway, which is a great place to hang out, with all the gardens and all this stuff going on there. So it was, I didn't have to be in the room all the time for the overdubs.
And did you know, I mean, it's a stupid question because no one ever really knows, but do you spend enough time, like some projects that are huge go super fast. And of course, no one has any idea like, oh, this is going to be huge. But that project was meticulous and they took their time like they knew it was going to be big.
Yeah.
And like, how do they even have the budget to make a record like that? Because I mean, they were around before, but they weren't huge before.
Yeah, I really don't know. I wonder if they had investors. I know nothing about the business of it. I know they weren't signed when they did the album.
Yeah. Because I think they were, unless I'm getting things confused, were they signed to like Because Music in France for publishing? Like they had some stuff that was going on, but it wasn't like.
Yeah, I really didn't. I've heard of them, but I didn't really know them before that. I mean, it wasn't the music they did before this album wasn't something that I listened to a lot or related to. It was, this electronic kind of thing. And then, so I really didn't know their old stuff until we started working on this.
Right. Well, we'll probably get schooled during the Q&A about, the things we didn't know about Daft Punk. But it did seem
all
as though...
all I knew about before we started this project was Around the World.
Right. Yeah, it just didn't seem as though like they would be in a position to... Because that's a position where the band is completely in control of their own record. There's no label that's going to say, yes, let's go spend as much time as you want. Like, it's always going to be constrained, and they had no constraints.
I know. That was the beauty of the sessions, too. It was, I mean, from the amount of time, to the amount of time spent just to get things right and experiment and everything, to the food, to everything. It was
But from everything I've heard you say, and then other people talking about the making of that record, like, there are a lot of bands that could get lost with that freedom. Like, there's experimenting for experimenting's sake, and you're never really just making moves forward, and you don't have momentum. But it sounds like, obviously, they're figuring stuff out. They didn't know exactly where stuff was going to go, but it was always moving forward, and they had a vision, and they knew what was right. And they
they had the big picture right from the beginning.
And like, even with all of these decisions, it doesn't seem as though they were spending a lot of time second guessing themselves. They might take forever to decide which version of something to use, but once they decided, that was that, right?
Yeah.
And you move on.
Yeah, and they'd spend a lot of time editing and a lot of time arranging and stuff. And even during the mix, we didn't do any recalls on that album at all. They booked the whole summer to mix. And since it was on an analog console, they didn't want to do any recalls. So we'd start a mix, and it would stay up till it was done. And they had they had a feed from the controller monitors in one of the ISO booths of the studio, and they had a whole rig in there. And a lot of times I'd be mixing, and they would change something about an arrangement or edits or something to send to me to mix. So it was pretty interactive. It wasn't like it wasn't like everything was there and we and mix it and that's it. It was an interactive process through the whole thing.
So really finishing the arrangements during the mix as well.
Yeah, I mean, there were some times where they've told me to take a couple days off where they wanted to work on something that was already up being mixed. So
right.
Yeah, so it was I mean, it's how a record should be made, but can't be anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and even it's not like, oh, that's how all records used to be made, because there aren't that many records in the history of records that were really made that way.
No,
I mean, it's one of the really fascinating things from Get Back. The Beatles, the Peter Jackson Beatles thing. It's just, I mean, obviously they're sitting there but that's a month total. And like, my favorite moment in the whole thing is they've just done the rooftop concert. They've played every song they were going to play up there twice. And like, well, let's have lunch. And what do you want to do after lunch? Well, we'll record the rest of the record. Like, I mean, that's how you made records. They weren't spending months doing this stuff. It's astonishing that record could be made that way in the first place, but that it worked out. It was like they knew every single second was going to be well spent, and it was all going to make it back. I mean, the album did not lose money.
No.
Just huge. So just in terms of mixing time, do you have any sense of how long those mixes were taking, or is it impossible to even tease that out from all the production changes and stuff that was happening?
It's hard. The mixes didn't take that long, really. I mean, I would say it was sort of like, as far as the work I had to do it was sort of like just anything in the analog days, where I'd spend a good day on a mix and then part of the next day to tweak what I missed and just, and things like that. But even though it might stretch over several days, the amount of hours actually sitting there mixing wasn't out of the ordinary at all.
Right. And I suppose one of the things that's really unusual, you talk about no recalls, like that never happens. You never don't go back to a song after you've worked on some songs from a record anymore. And obviously in the analog days, that sucked to have to do it. And now it's no big deal. You open the session, you do some tweaks, but it's such a part of the process to kind of realize something as you're working on song 10 and think, ooh, let me see what happens on song 3 if I go back. And that kind of thing. And it's none of that.
Right.
Which is nice. Did you believe them that there weren't going to be recalls?
I don't think it was ever really said.
Right. Because I think I would have been shocked, with a group that's that meticulous, and, you'd think that they'd go home and then a week later, like, all right, we booked another 4 months, So that's amazing. Well, and obviously that record was gigantic. So that had to be good for you.
It was. It really was. And it was a good. It was a nice experience. I enjoyed it too.
And did it kind of kickstart some stuff? Did you have like a whole bunch of stuff coming in after that?
Yeah, quite a bit. Nothing like the old days, though. I don't know if it's just me or just that I'm not a big self-promoter, or that the music business is so much different. It used to be that in the 90s, 80s or something, if I worked on a hit record, it would mean continuous work for like months or years.
Right.
This did develop. Things did come out of this, but not like it used to be.
No, I think they're just. It seems ridiculous because there's so many more records getting made, but I think there are fewer mainstream label-based records. You know, bands are making their own decisions a lot of the time, and you don't know where the decision making is coming from. So yeah. But I have skipped over about 4,000 records.
Okay, well, we could get into them.
We could get into them. I'm wondering though if we should do it more in the Q&A, or whether I should just be mentioning stuff, because there's so much. And again, with the internet, with credits, you have no idea what's what. Like, the fact that you didn't know that you were credited on The Weeknd and Sting. Well, the Sting Duets record.
Oh, I know.
That was 2021 that came out.
So I wonder what I did on that. I don't know.
Apparently you mixed something.
Yeah, the Weeknd. I can see. I did very little on that, really. But what it was is that after the Daft Punk album, a couple of years after, they went in to try some tracking on some new stuff. Didn't really go anywhere, but I think some of the parts of the the rhythm section, the rhythm section tracking session ended up sampled on a Weeknd record.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
That makes sense. And nice that they carried the credit over, because, now getting any kind of credit is interesting.
Well, see, that must have been the Daft Punk guys. Those guys are so straight up, about everything.
Right. Amazing. Well, my feeling is, rather than me just like say names and stuff, I think we should go to an earlier Q&A if you're cool with that. But are there any albums like in particular that I haven't talked about that you just want to talk about, or anything that we haven't touched on? This is not the way I normally do things, but this is also why sometimes these take 5.5 hours. So.
Yeah. No, I can't really think of anything. Of any whole album. Yeah.
You got some Snoop Dogg and some Mary J. Blige in there.
Yes. There was a few years I worked for Pharrell a lot and did a Snoop Dogg album, which I really liked, and it was really good. It just didn't sell.
Right.
But that was, and mixing a couple of Pharrell albums, that was nice.
That worked out.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was that. That was all the stuff that happened after Daft Punk.
Right.
Daft Punk.
Well, there's an Essential Bill Withers record that you're an engineer on. But...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I was a mixer.
Okay. All right. And that was at the time, or this was for a reissue thing?
I think this was in the 80s.
Right.
80s.
Right.
Yeah, I know. It must have been mid 80s, because it was I remember doing it at the Complex, which, Earth, Wind and Fire's place.
Right.
So in
George's place, yeah.
Yeah. Must have been around that time.
Wow. And then there are a bunch of jazz records. There's the Chick Corea and the Bob Mincer and stuff like that. But then amongst that, you got the Cores, R. Kelly. It's insane. This is why I didn't just make a list, because it just would have been...
Now that you're mentioning them, I remember those. It's like a lot of these that are just one-offs, like one or two songs, they're not right at the top of my mind. Like R. Kelly was one song for a movie. Let's see, the Chorus, I think, was one song for a record.
Right. The Chick Corea was a live thing, live in Barcelona.
Chick Corea, I did a few things for him. He was great. I did a live thing, and then two live things. There was one album I mixed that was a live tour, a Return to Forever tour, and then there's another album I mixed that was the best I mean, it was like all the best, what they thought were the best songs of every Return to Forever album remixed. Did
Wow.
that was a trip.
That must have been amazing.
Yeah, yeah. No, I did, and I love doing jazz records. There's not many made, I guess.
No.
But man, I mean, what can I say about it? It's like the engineering part is easy. It's just get the sounds. You just listen to these great players. That's yeah.
Yeah, and there's so much self-balancing and interaction that, it's...
Yeah.
I mean, it's not easy. You still have to be good, which you are.
Yeah.
But then, look, mixed in with all this stuff, you also got, like, LA Guns and Rat.
Yeah.
So, all right, come on. Let's hear a little bit about that. Like, where's that come from?
Well, Rat, I forgot who called me for that. It was one song. It was for a movie called Point Break that they were doing the main title. I think it was the main title or end title for it. But yeah, that was that. They wanted me to co-produce it. One of the few times I've ever been involved in production.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit. Were you ever interested in being a producer and it just didn't happen, or what do you think?
No, I never really. I mean, there was a couple times I tried, but it's like, I don't know. I don't like the organization and business aspect of dealing with anything. I'm just a tech geek, and it was just too much. I mean, it could be enjoyable sometimes, but it was just too much responsibility.
Right. Well, so when you're producing Rat for a huge movie, like, how's that working out?
I mean, I set up the tracking sessions, made some suggestions and stuff. I mean, it was one song, so it wasn't that.
Yeah, and it is, for people who don't get to do this, doing songs for film soundtracks with bands, it's almost like you got to get out of jail free card. Like, everyone's taking it really seriously, but it's not part of their discography in the same way. So everybody's much more open to things. Did you like working in that genre, though? Did you...
I did, and it was because it was so different for me, and I did enjoy it. I didn't feel confident because it's not what I normally do.
Right.
Rock records is I tend to I tend to make things too smooth. Being a jazz pop guy. I remember I did a mix for Joan Jett. And they liked it, but they said, and I think it was released, but it was called the Baby's Ass Mix being released.
Baby's Ass Mix. Nice. I would love to have anything I've done be released as the Baby's Ass Mix. That would be amazing.
I thought that was funny. That was good.
All right. I'm just breezing through your 750-page discography here.
Wow, that long?
No, it's not that long. I'm just, it's one long page, so I don't know how many pages it is. But that's like, Al Schmidt would go speak somewhere and they'd make a show of having printed out his all music page, and it would be 52 pages of something. And yours is getting up there. It's long. I mean, there's some Cher in there as well.
Yeah.
Jennifer Lopez, Julio Iglesias, Alejandro Sanz.
Oh, that was a good one.
Anything to say about that one?
That was in 2003. There was a huge album, multiple Grammys. And we went down to, they didn't want to come up. They wanted to be at the session. So we went out to Miami for that. And and it was at Criteria, and they had a room with an Oxford console. So I was so at home there. That album had some great players on it. The producer was very, very good. This guy, Lulo Perez. And I mean, it took a while. They were pretty detailed and, pretty nitpicky, but it came out really good, and it was very enjoyable. Good songs. It was excellent playing. Vinnie Colaiuta on that whole album.
Right. Well, I love your mixing credit is both in English and in Spanish. So that's good. Because it's like one little typo away from mezcal.
Could use some of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's mezcal time in the UK. I don't know. It might. Well,
Yeah.
you're in
No,
Vegas,
it's too
actually.
early. It's too early.
But you're Vegas. You can do whatever the hell you want any time of day. That place never closes.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm working my way backwards. Got some Anita Baker. Got some Kenny G. Some Baha Men.
Did a lot. Baha Men, yeah. It wasn't. What was the name of the song? It wasn't "Who Let the Dogs Out." It was after that.
Right.
Yeah.
There are a couple of Baha Men on here, actually. Got some Faith Hill.
Oh yeah. Did 3 songs for her. That was nice.
Some Andrew Lloyd Webber, Celine Dion.
Yeah.
Obviously the Clapton, Backstreet Boys, Mark Anthony, Kiss, the box set.
I mixed 2 albums for Kiss, 2 full albums, Revenge and Psycho Circus.
Right.
That was fun.
And it wasn't the baby ass mix.
No, these were real. These are real mixes.
And again, so how'd that come about, and how? Because obviously, I mean, it's a bit outside of what you were doing at the time. Though, I think Kiss really is interested in being more pop oriented as they're mixing. But it's a guitar band.
Yeah. Don't know exactly how that came out. There was the Revenge album. I think I did some sessions for Gene Simmons for some band for his company. I forgot, it might have been Crown of Thorns or something.
Right.
And then so they called me to do the Kiss Revenge album. Bob Ezrin produced, and that was fun. Loved working with him. Character. So I mixed the Revenge album. Then they called me. We did that over at Record One. And they had that big Neve 80s. I think it's at East West now.
Yeah, the 8078. Yeah,
double 78. Yeah. So and then Psycho Circus did at home in New York.
Right.
Yeah, but no, those guys were Gene and Paul were great people to work with. They were,
Yeah, super talented, know exactly what they're doing. Yeah, there's no messing around. All right, I'm just going to work backwards for a couple more, and then we're going to get Mark in here and get some questions, because I'm sure there are going to be a million questions. But it's like I've been scrolling for a long time, and I'm only back at the year 2000. PJ Olson, that's an interesting one. Do you remember PJ?
PJ? Oh no, I don't.
It was in 1999. He still is. He's a great singer and songwriter. He is the singer in Alan Parsons' band. Now he's been singing for Alan for a long time, but he was an independent artist, and I worked with him with Carmen Rizzo on his very first record. And he had this one song that everybody was like, this is going to be a gigantic hit. And it was on his own self-released, self-titled first album. And then the song was again on his second album, because everybody was so sure that was going to be the one. We got some REO Speedwagon going on.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was in the 90s.
Yeah, 99, very end of the 90s.
Oh, you know something? I'm down to 38% battery on my computer. So.
Do you have a charger?
Yes, I do. I have to go get it, though. So I'm going to stop my video for a second and get this. Can I leave for about 1 minute?
Of course. You can do whatever you want. This is a very informal show, as you may have noticed.
Okay. I will return in 1 minute.
You will return. I will scroll through some credits, and we'll get Mark on here to get ready for the Q&A.
Okay.
Hiya, Mark.
Hello.
Hello.
This has been incredible.
He's insane. He's just done everything. And I literally have been scrolling the entire last segment, and I'm at 1998, and I'm going backwards.
Right. We were throwing around links in the chat for his credits, and on All Music, there are 1,014 credits.
Is that all?
That's all. Yeah.
1,014.
1,014. It's insane.
And the thing is, you've heard of 98% of them.
Right.
And they've probably heard 90% of them.
Right.
I mean, Jennifer Holliday, Vanessa Williams, Babyface, Marvin Hamlish. Those are 4 that are in a row. Then Tony Braxton. Yeah. Then there's some more Neil Diamond, some BB and CC Winans. It's just incredible. But this is why I didn't want to do my, what was that like? Oh, you worked with that. What was that like?
This is the perfect one for that.
Yeah.
Eric Clapton, Tyler the Creator, Snoop Dogg, Mary J. Blige. And then Hans Zimmer.
There's of course. Of course. Like, why not? Yeah. Gladys Knight, Boyz II Men, Amy Grant, Gerald Levert, Julio Iglesias, Mariah Carey. That's a good little stretch.
We could do this all day. Kenny G, Mariah Carey, Barry White, Britney Spears, Vanessa Williams.
All right. Mika Paris, Color Me Bad, Michael Bolton, Prince.
This is the most name dropping ever.
Yeah. What do you think of that, kids?
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't ask him about he mixed a live Miles and Quincy Jones live at Montreux.
Gotta ask about that.
All right. We'll ask about that one.
All right.
Because no one's allowed to work with Miles Davis and not talk about it.
Here's a cool one. One of Mick's former clients is Patty Casey, who is in the chat.
Uh-huh.
Hi, Patty. Yeah.
I
remember about that.
So one of the credits we came across that you have to just at least talk about for a second is the live Miles and Quincy live at Montreux album that you mixed.
Okay. Yeah, Quincy hired me to do that. That was it was Gil Evans Orchestra.
Man.
With Miles. And I mean, I just mixed it. I didn't really meet anybody on that. It was recorded at a Montreux Jazz Festival. It was a pretty incredible record. I remember having some very weird technical problems on that one, though, because it was recorded. Should I get into the tech shit?
Sure, why not?
Okay, why not? Because musically it was really great and everything. But the problem was that it was recorded live on a 16-bit machine on the older 3348, and the peak level on most of it was around -20.
Wow.
So if you listen to that record, it sounds almost like an 8-bit recording. It's like
man. And was it all the classic arrangements like Sketches of Spain and stuff like that, or was it new arrangements for things?
I think.
Here, I'll go look. I'll look at it here. I don't need to put you on the stop for that.
Yeah.
Boplicity.
I mean, some of the stuff was familiar to me.
Oh, yeah. So there's a Miles Ahead medley, and then there was a Porgy and Bess medley. Yeah. Amazing. I bet that didn't suck.
No, it definitely didn't suck. I just kept thinking, shit, I wish there was such a thing as 24-bit digital at the time. But there wasn't. Right. Well, we were, while you were getting your charger, we were just sort of like reading credits in order, and it's just absolutely insane. It's crazy. So we're gonna go to Q&A. But if there's anything at all you think of that you want to talk about, remember this is your show, and we have no time limit. So whatever you want to do. Give me 1 minute.
Yeah.
Because I got about 1 million texts about stuff I'm supposed to do.
Okay.
I just want to. Want to write back, say I'm in a holding pattern.
No. Do your thing, and I will just read some more credits.
You want to phase off again, Andrew?
This will take me just a couple minutes.
Yeah, no worries.
You're fine. 98 Degrees, Ray Charles.
Yeah. Well, Jermaine Jackson, Patti LaBelle, Barry Manilow, George Benson, Barbara Streisand, George Duke, Doc Severinsen, Earth, Wind and Fire, Kenny G, The Pointer Sisters, Boz Skaggs, Johnny Mathis, Glenn Medeiros. Okay, so Glenn Medeiros is the only one like I'm not really familiar with. And then you skip back to Saida Garrett, Stanley Clarke, Doc Severinsen again, Kenny Loggins. Come on.
I just got the beat down. But you forgot to mention the Baja Men.
No. We already talked about the Baja Men. You were not paying attention. He did not mix Who Let the Dogs Out. It was after that. We already talked about that, Mark. This shows how much attention you are paying. How much attention you're paying is exactly how many fucks you have to give. I am completely out of both.
Totally out of both. I'm looking to see if there's something you didn't do.
Oh. See, now Mick's getting phone calls.
Oh, man.
Jessica Simpson.
Yeah.
Martin. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, and then of course
It's funny just to scroll down
the
it.
first credit, like chronologically, 1970, but it's he did a surround mix, but it's Derek and the Dominoes, of course. You know,
It's amazing. You know, no big deal.
yeah, no big deal. No big deal.
Just crazy.
So I'm hoping we have lots of good questions.
You know, I really feel like Mick would love SoundFlow.
We're not talking about that, but I think he would. I don't know. He is a self-proclaimed not digital geek, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
But he loves workflow stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We could talk about how I dodged the bullet of not having to use a program I don't know to listen to a track I don't know today.
Oh, yeah, that was great. That was totally great.
But maybe we'll do one of those on a Monday. Like, why not?
I think we should. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I should get to pick the track.
Okay. If you're sure.
All of those who want Andrew to listen to the multi-track of Limp Bizkit's Nookie on camera, say aye in the chat.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, no. No. Just got a question.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry
All
about
right.
that. That might keep the phone from ringing a little bit.
All right. So all good. We're not keeping you from anything.
No. I just had to tell somebody. I didn't know we were going to spend so much time, which is great because I'm really enjoying this. But I was supposed to do some edits with somebody at 2.
Oh, right. Well, if you ever have to go, just basically hang up on us.
No. This is.
So, all right. Well, we'll see. Once we get into the Q&A, you might change your mind. You might hate this. So let's see how we go. So what you got, Mark?
All right. Okay, so we take all of our questions over on Crowdcast. For anybody watching on YouTube, you can head to puremix.net, follow the banner, and you'll end up in the Crowdcast chat. Make sure you get your questions posted in there. Everybody can upvote each other's questions, and as always, we start with the most upvoted question. So that one today comes from Kenneth Wright, and Kenneth asks, with your amazing work with Daft Punk on Random Access Memories and their level of attention to detail and perfection, for someone who wants to work with similar artists who take the time to get it right instead of rushing through the project, is this more reliant on the artist's work ethic or the available budget? And how can you urge them that quality in the end will be in their favor? Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I would like to do more like that. Unfortunately, it's fewer and far between. I don't think that. I think mostly budgetary problems is why that isn't done so much. I mean, there's quite a few artists who would really love to get things, as perfect as they hear it in their heads and would like to do it. But I mean, there's just just the aspect of it that's, it has to make sense financially, unfortunately. So, I mean, I do run into a lot of artists who would like to spend the time and really work on a project to perfection, but it just doesn't happen that much. On the other side of it, there's a lot of people who are so good at what they do that they can make a great record pretty quickly. It might not be everything they want or everything anybody wants, but I think I think the best records that are made with a lower budget are just people who are talented and have the foresight to achieve what they want to do, that can do it fairly quickly, I guess.
Well, and witness the Beatles and most jazz records.
Right.
So, yeah, it doesn't always take the time. And one thing I want to mention, I'm going to break into the question queue here because we never talked about it. The fact that there is a speaker company that is half your name and you make speakers. And so,
yeah.
You want to talk about that for a minute?
Sure. Yeah, that's Guzauski Swiss Audio. Larry Swiss, who is a studio designer, he passed away a few years ago. He was a studio designer, and him and I got together. He built the control room in my basement in New York, in that studio I had, and we were trying to design a speaker for high-end home studios that can have as wide of a frequency response and and produce the SPLs of a larger monitor in a big control room. So we had to get something it's a little bigger than bookshelf size, but we wanted it to have really wide range and handle a lot of power. And what it is, it's a 12-inch air suspension woofer. It's a sealed box. I like sealed boxes because there's no compromise in transient response. Then you're not using a resonant port. And it's a 3-way tri-amp system. And it's worked out really well. Quite a few people have them. We're not a big company at all. It's pretty much custom, but there's quite a few, probably 50, 60 systems around the world right now, and people are happy. Daft Punk bought one for me because we did the whole album using those monitors. Right. Let's see. There's one at Church Studios in England. There's a few around Europe because our Europe rep is really good. And yeah, that's really about it. It's pretty fun. The system resonance is about 35 hertz. So that's the minus 3 dB point. So it gets really low, really gets down there.
Wow.
For most cases, you don't really need a subwoofer with this system.
And these are just slightly larger than bookshelf speakers.
Yeah. I mean, they're heavier, and they're, I think they're about 14 inches tall by about 23 and a half inches wide. And I think 17 inches deep. They're pretty deep.
Right. But still, that's not bad.
No, they can, you don't want to put them on a meter bridge. They're sort of heavy for that, but right behind it for near field, pretty good. Try to keep the drivers fairly close together. So, so we don't have a phase problem near field, sweet spot being pretty wide.
And are they the only speakers you use, or do you switch back and forth?
No, I'm actually not using them right at the moment because since we moved here, I don't have a real studio set up. And I have to be extremely near field because I haven't really done the room yet. So I'm back to my old Tannoy SRM 10Bs.
There you go.
Because, that coax,
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You can be really close to it and it's still phase coherent. But I am going back to my own speakers after I do some,
right. Those are the only speakers I used for 25 years until I got these PMCs. But yeah. I got mine in... Actually, it was at Westlake Studio C on Santa Monica. I think it was 1982 or 83. And they were the first pair in LA, or maybe the first pair in the United States. And, wow.
And because Westlake, they had their warehouse and the studio was in the same building back then. I tried these things out, and I've tried other speakers, but I've used these until I built my own, and now I'm back to these just temporarily.
And of course, Conway is the only studio maybe in the world that just has a pair of them as house speakers that you can use.
Yeah, that's because I was there so long.
Yeah.
And people got used to them.
Nice. Yeah, it was always great. It was the one place I could work where I didn't have to bring my speakers.
Yeah, Village has them too.
Oh, right. Okay. For some reason, I never did. I mean, I did a couple of sessions there, but not many. Anyway, I jumped the queue. So
no problem.
Back to you, Mark.
Awesome. Nice. Somebody just posted a link in the comments there. One person is asking, how can they reach out to work with you, Gal?
Yeah.
Is there a website or? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I do have a website. You know what? I'm so bad at self-promotion. I don't know if it's still up. Let me check. Give me a second.
I mean, do you have management?
Sort of. Yeah. Well, it's because, it's mickguz.com.
Awesome. Cool.
And you can get in touch with me. There's a hire me thing on there.
There you go. Okay. All right. So on our next question here. So our next one is from Danny B. And Danny says, thanks so much for doing this. I've just been listening again to the Earth, Wind, and Fire albums, and they still sound amazing. As I've listened, I realized just how much is going on in those songs, yet you can hear every instrument. Can you please say something about how you approach getting all of those instruments separated, yet all cohesive?
Okay, well, number one, it's the arrangements, because everything is right in their spots. And as far as mixing, it's partially stereo placement, keeping things out of the way of other things, keeping things that should work together. partially EQ, accentuating frequencies of instruments that you want to hear that part of, and attenuating frequencies of other instruments that's going to interfere with what's in focus, and also use of reverb for space. Some instruments and vocals are wetter than others, and try to keep like a 3D space going that you can hear everything. It's also, I mean, that's basically what it is. It's something that, I just do. I don't really entirely think about it. I just got better at it over the years, is, wanting to hear something and just going for just going for it, because it's not one specific thing that I do all the time. It's just, variations on that to just achieve what I'd like to hear.
So let me ask you about reverbs in particular, though, because some people like to have one or two reverbs so that you're sharing a space with things. But like Al Schmidt famously hated to have multiple things going into the same reverb. He would like to have lots of separate reverbs for things. Where do you fall on the reverbs for a song thing?
Lately I've usually been using several, and that's because everybody wants stems these days. So how I mix now is I break it down to subgroups that feed the stereo bus. Depending on the song, the arrangement could be up to 16 of them, usually around 10 or 12, and instruments even that are going to have that I want in the same spatial area, but that are on different subgroups. Then I'll put an identical reverb for each subgroup. So there may be 4 or 5 reverbs, but they might be all set exactly the same. Then some set different.
Right.
In the old days before stems, I'd usually have a reverb for drums that had very little pre-delay and was sort of roomy sounding, and that would just be for the drums, and then like maybe if I want a longer one on the toms and stuff, and then there'd be reverb, a couple reverbs for vocals, and they might share with other instruments, and there would just be fewer of them. Now it's pretty much the same concept, but there'll be a lot more reverbs because they have to be broken down to the subgroups for the stems. Right. Yeah, because usually when I finish the session, I just print all those subgroups, and that's the stems.
Right. Well, I got something for you if you ever need more stems than that, but it's conversation for another day.
I want less stems.
Well, but what if you didn't have to be in the room while they were being printed? That's the key.
That's good. Yeah. See, I just set it up that I print them all at once.
Right. Yeah. See, I've just found doing the Atmos thing, I've been splitting stuff up like crazy when I have control over the stems, and that's been really, really good. But it means they're not all going to happen at the same time.
Right. We got to talk about that.
Yeah, we can talk about that. We'll talk about that. Yeah. All right, Mark.
But, it was starting off as a really good salesman pitch, like a good.
Yeah, and then I don't give the payoff. I don't.
No, it was great. Nick, what if I could tell you that?
What if I could? And I can.
Is that something you'd be interested in, Nick?
I've written an app that bounces mixes for you, but it's not quite ready to be unveiled. Yeah.
Wow. So you're digitally literate.
Well, this is what I've done since the lockdown started, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Impressive. Very impressive.
So, but that's a tale for another day. Let's talk about you. What you got, Mark?
Awesome. Christian Martinez is our next question here, and he says, "Hey, Mick and Andrew, thank you so much for doing this. Both of you are awesome people. Question for both of you: how can we as engineers develop our feel for good music versus just knowing how to make a track sound good sonically? Thanks so much, guys."
Wow, that stumps me.
Well, it's interesting because you're one of the, not one of the few, but a lot of engineers started out as musicians or whatever, and you did not at all. And there is a large chunk of the engineering community who do not play an instrument and do not approach it musically, but you obviously hear things musically because balance is all about making the song work. Yeah. And you've talked about how a great arrangement will not mix itself, but it's much, much easier. But you've made some very difficult things work incredibly well. So there is a huge musicality in the way you hear things. And it's hard to separate. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, like, and this happens so many times with questions like this, where there's no easy way to answer it other than just do it. But I think you can go back and study other people's records and try and figure out, like, well, why does that record groove so hard? Like, is it because there's something that's way too loud? Or is it that everything is very nicely blended together or something like that? And it's hard to teach, but it might be easier to sort of reverse engineer after the fact.
I know actually what I'm doing. I mean, if I'm mixing a song that I like, that's the arrangement I like, it's pretty easy, even though it's involved. If I have to mix something that doesn't musically move me, I have an awful time, even if it's a simple mix.
But I've heard you talk about kind of like the way you'll approach the low end based on what jobs instruments are doing and how fast the groove is and things like that. And so those are all very musical things that are influencing your technical engineering.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They are. I was just saying, well, I maybe I misunderstood the question a little. Could you repeat that anyways?
Yeah. Oops, sorry. I just scrolled past it.
Well,
so how can we as engineers develop our feel for good music versus just knowing how to make a track sound good sonically?
Right. Yeah. So, I don't know. I think a feel for good music is innate. I mean, does it move you or not? Do you want to? I mean, when you're mixing it, do you want to hear it over again? I mean, is it something you enjoy listening to? It's the technical sonic aspect is always pretty easy if it's recorded well. I mean, if you're trying to fight with bad sounds, and that's a different story. But if the music moves you, I mean, you can get a perspective that works. I mean, you just mix it that it feels better to you. If the music isn't something that you can relate to, it's incredibly difficult, I think.
I think it's also, it's like you have this ability to make, I mean, everything you've mixed that I've ever heard sounds amazing. Like just like empirically, sonically, it sounds amazing. Whereas I would argue there's lots of stuff I've mixed that does not necessarily sound amazing. But I think that I am good at finding what's important in the arrangement and the feel and how to bring out what you're supposed to get. And I'll do that at the expense of sonics because I can't figure out how to do it and make it sound, good on whatever that level is. But I think that's sort of part of the answer to the question is, like you say about making a track sound sonically good. I don't know that you can separate that, because if it sounds sonically good but it's inappropriate, then it doesn't sound good.
Right. That's why the question is so hard for me to answer.
Yeah, so I completely understand why you'd ask the question, but it's an unanswerable one, because the sonics are so enslaved to the musical feel of what you do with the mix that they almost don't matter.
For instance, I mean, you could get a mix that say the drums are recorded great. You can put up drums and it just go, wow, this sounds really good, feels good. It's and then when you put the rest of, if you put more things with it, that the song's not working, and that's the problem. It's like it's hard. It can't really have one without the other.
No, and I think that I've talked about this.
Sometimes a song will work better if it sounds shitty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I've talked about this before with other people, where you're tracking and working on a song and the drums just sound terrible and there's nothing you can do and they sound awful. And then finally you move on to another song, nothing changes and the drums sound amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not because they're playing differently, it's because the song's better.
Yeah.
So
things are arranged to work with rather than against.
Yeah, it's voodoo, but it's always to do with that. It's always to do with the music.
Yeah.
So we managed to not answer that question very extensively.
Right. Sorry about that. That was that was a
Well,
hard
you
question.
touched on some really important things that resonated with people in the chat too, about the arrangement being super important, and you know, awesome. Okay, next question is from Santiago Mendez, and he says, "Hi Mick, huge fan. There are a couple of interviews in which you suggest that Random Access Memories was mixed in both analog consoles and in the box, but other times, you're being put on the spot here, you said that it was mixed 100% in the box. Which one is it?" Needless to say, it
It's
sounds
neither
awful
of
either
those.
way. Just
I don't
curious.
think I ever said it was mixed in the box. All the tracks from Random Access Memories are in Pro Tools at 96K. Some started analog, like we talked about earlier. Everything was in Pro Tools, but it was mixed through a Neve 88R to half-inch tape. Where I might have said, or you might have misunderstood, is that there were some premixes in the box. If we, because in several cases we ended up with more tracks than we had faders on the console, so I may have pre-mixed a group of vocals or an orchestral part and send it out on a stereo channel to the console, but everything went through the console. We also, because the band didn't want to use any plugins, they wanted to be all analog, as far as processing. The only plugins we used on the session were de-essers and gates. De-essers because the digital de-essers have a look ahead, and they can attack an S before it happens, and gates because they have a look ahead, so they open before the sound hits. And so that was something that worked better in a plugin than analog. But the whole idea of this album was to process it analog and mix to analog tape. That was something they wanted to do right from the beginning.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the confusion comes because I've heard you in a couple of interviews talk about recording the basic tracks where those were going straight to Pro Tools and also to tape and then Pro Tools. Right. So those recordings, song to song, they were choosing whether it was going to be analog or digital.
Yeah.
But they were all digital by the time you were...
Yeah, and 90% of them was recorded right to Pro Tools. Right. And the overdubs were all done right to Pro Tools. So I mean, that much in the box, we went for like a short signal path for a lot of things rather than going through the console into Pro Tools, going through a preamp like a Neve 1073 or an API, depending, Avalon, depending on what we're recording, what we want to, and then going right to Pro Tools with minimum amount of processing, just to keep a short signal path. But some did go through the console to record, and everything went through the console to mix. But
right. All right, you heard it here second.
Pro Tools was mostly a big tape machine for an editor.
Awesome. Now the record's straight.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Next question is from Chaz, and Chaz says, "Hi everyone. When I was a kid, my parents took me to Chuck Mangione concerts at Melody Fair in Buffalo, New York. The live sound was great, but I'm still amazed at the sound of the Friends in Love album recorded at the Eastman House with the Rochester Philharmonic. It totally stands up today, and I was wondering what you can share about the recording, mics, console, tape machine, stage placement. Thanks, Chaz."
Oh, wow. We already did talk about that, saying it sounded terrible. It was my first professional recording. We used, if anybody's familiar with the Ampex MX35 mixers, they were 4 channels into 2. We had a bunch of those. It was recorded on the Scully 4-track half-inch machine. As far as mics, it was pretty much whatever we could dig up. Lots of EVs and Shure and some AKG condensers, like for drum overheads. And I mean, this was 1969 when this actually happened, so I couldn't tell you which mics. What I could tell you is on the 4 tracks, we had 1 track that was a whole mix of the rhythm section: drums, percussion, bass, piano, and I don't think it was there. Right, the guitar was in the solo track because he did a lot of solo stuff. So there was a rhythm section track, and then the left side of the orchestra track, which was the string section, then the right side of the orchestra track, which was brass and woodwinds, and then solo and vocal track, which was guitar, one of the Chuck's keyboard, flugelhorn, vocals. That was all on 1 track. So it was just 4 tracks split up like that. And then there was one part where there was a choir that came out of the audience, that stood up in the audience, like a few rows of the audience, and that was mic'd separately, and that was bussed across the two left and right orchestra tracks. So that's Friends in Love. And thank you for saying it sounded good.
Wow. It's amazing. But it just shows from the very beginning the musicality of being able to handle something like that to 4-track and get it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you remember a lot of details.
A lot of distortion on that too. A lot of stuff overloaded. Those Ampex mixers didn't have pads, and they didn't. We didn't have pads.
I'm a big fan of distortion, so I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, next question comes from Masiak, and he says, can you share some moments on recording and mixing The Road to Escondido by J.J. Cale and Eric Clapton? I would love to hear everything about how it was made. Was there a lot of overdubs or anything at the first take? What kind of gear's been involved? Anything?
I only mixed that, so I couldn't really tell you anything about the recording. Trying to think if that was, I know they did some of that at J.J. Cale's house, and I think probably the basic tracks were, I know they used, was that when Record One was still going? Or yeah, I think it was. So that's usually where they did the tracks, but couldn't really say. I mean, it was well recorded. It wasn't, I don't remember it being anything really difficult to mix. It was, just nicely done. Sorry, I can't be any more help with that, but I don't remember too many specifics of the mix of that one, and I don't know anything about the recording of it.
All right.
All right. Let's see here. Here's a good one from Alejandro. Hi, Mick and Andrew. What's your opinion on smoking weed before mixing? Thanks.
Don't do it.
I wouldn't do it, but that's just me. Some people do well on it. I forget what I'm doing if I do it. I remember, and I learned that very early on, even back in Rochester, after the basement studio. I remember doing a session. It was recording and mixing a band. I had an idea. I got an idea for a great effect. I had a whole handful of patch cords going over to the patch bay, and I forgot what I was doing. I'm just standing there with these patch cords. What was I trying to do? So I have learned not to smoke weed during working since the early 70s.
Well, except that might have saved you, because stoned, if you remembered what you were doing, you could have spent 12 hours on it and then hated it the next day.
I've actually since then, a couple of years ago, as an experiment, tried getting stoned and, not doing a mix for a client on book time, but just playing with stuff. And I got so zoned and so obsessive about little things that meant nothing. And I listened to it the next day, and it was a terrible mix, but the things that I focused in on were like, wow, this is really cool in this total picture that sucked. So that's what...
Yeah, don't do it.
No, I don't recommend any kind of consciousness altering substances while you're working.
I think there's, obviously it's not mythology. I don't even know what you'd call it, but I mean, in the history of music too, with musicians, and there are a lot of musicians who died from heroin habits that they were afraid to kick because they thought it was the source of all their creativity and all that. But I don't think I have heard of a single person who has stopped being creative after kicking an addiction to some sort of substance or alcohol, like anything. So I don't. Given the fact that it doesn't take away any of your creativity, I don't think it necessarily adds to it. Maybe inhibition as a performer, you do some stuff you wouldn't do otherwise, but I don't want to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but...
I just think that, smoking pot affects your short-term memory, at least it does for me. And so much of mixing and recording is short-term memory of a lot of different aspects and a lot of different occurrences, and that it's really hard to do if you mess with that.
I think it really points to the fact, like, after you've been mixing for a chunk of time, it's mentally exhausting. There is a lot you got to do and keep track of. And like when I do these mix tank reviews, people are like, how can you remember the details of a song? I mean, that's only 4 minutes. Over an 8-hour session, like, that's what you got to do. So I would say don't mess with your brain too much while you're working.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's a hard session, wait till afterwards. Then you can do anything you want.
Then get ripped.
Yeah.
Not that we're
Awesome.
condoning
Okay.
drugs here.
No, just pop.
All right. Next question is from Gary Brune. He says, greetings from Norway. I'm 58 years old and your music has influenced how I hear music today. What is the work you're most proud of? And maybe ones that we don't even know about.
Okay. There are a few that I'm proud of over the years. I'd say the first one that I'm really proud of my engineering was the Feel So Good album. That one just went really together really nice. After that, Earth, Wind, and Fire Ray's album. Let's see. It's funny. It's like I like the earlier stuff better because it was just more exciting at the time, being new in this. Daft Punk album, of course, that was a major thing. A lot of the stuff I mixed, I think Mr. album I was really happy with. Most of the sessions did with Burt Bacharach I was really happy with, especially That's What Friends Are For. Let's see.
Is there any off the radar thing that we probably haven't heard that you love?
I'm trying to think.
I mean, so much of the stuff you've done is gigantic that's a really hard question to answer. While you were gone, we were just reading lists of credits in chronological order, and everybody here has heard of every single one of these artists. So
You're having a name off.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of obscure stuff in here.
Yeah, but I did early on did quite a bit of obscure stuff. Here's one that's pretty obscure. That was like one of the first mixes I did when I moved to LA. I was at Larrabee when I was doing both tech and engineering. This is in 78, I think, 78, early 79. Motown artists were doing a birthday tribute to Berry Gordy. And it was like everybody on Motown did this song called Pops, We Love You.
Wow.
And I got to mix it. So that was really cool. That was really cool. There was another thing, I think it's on Apple Music. You can find another thing right around that same time that I was really happy with. Glenn Campbell's song written by Jim Webb called Highwayman.
Right.
That's another one that didn't do much, but I really liked it.
Well, a little guy named Glenn Campbell.
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't one of his big hits. So
no, but still. Yeah, your little stuff is bigger than most people's big stuff.
But Pops, We Love You was an inside job, So
yeah,
it was released as a record.
Okay, so that would have had Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye on it, and some other people.
I mean, stuff like that. I know I mixed one song for Diana Ross. I forgot what it was. Marvin Gaye, I think that was more involved in that. It was samples of Marvin Gaye for other artists.
But were they both on the Pops We Love You track?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I think Mark's found it.
Put in the chat.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe you found the track.
Yeah, I did. It's on a bunch of stuff. Here, I'll put it in our Zoom chat so you have it too.
Okay.
Nice.
And chat room, it's coming for you guys as well. All right.
I haven't heard it since I did it, so it could be totally embarrassing too.
Somehow I don't think so.
Yeah. That's going to be a fun one to check out.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. There you go, chat room. Okay. Awesome. Next question. Okay, our next most upvoted question, it's just got a bunch of votes is from John. And we want to know how many reel-to-reel tapes have been used on Random Access Memories.
Okay, there was very few 2-inch because, I mean, we just went through the machine, recorded right to Pro Tools. As far as half-inch, I figure every song had several passes of a mix. I mean, the main mix, then sometimes one alternate. There's one thing else I forgot to tell you guys. While we were mixing to 3 analog machines on Daft Punk, we mixed every song to each machine 3 times the exact same mix, because they wanted to hear like the level that I thought it should be at, and then drop it a couple dB for less tape saturation, then raise it a couple dB for more tape saturation. So there were 3 prints on each of 3 machines, 2 of them running at 30 IPS. So there was probably each song took 6 reels. And they also wanted to print instrumental mixes, and they wanted to print the stems to analog too.
Just to make sure they would never line up.
Right. So, but I didn't.
What do you got for that, Andrew?
I didn't have to be in the room for all this. I printed the 3 main mixes, and then and then I think the instrumentals. But there were tons of tape, and in true Daft Punk fashion, they wanted to make sure every reel of tape was perfect. So every time we changed tape, they'd have the tech come in
and rebias.
Not just align with an alignment tape, but they come in with a audio precision analyzer and run frequency response and distortion curves for every reel of tape we used.
Good God.
You might have took all summer, and the mixes weren't that hard.
Exactly. You mix like an hour a song. That's it. Wow.
I mean, the mixes were the normal mixes, taking a day and then maybe tweaking. But as far as, printing all this stuff, and then they would listen to each thing a ton of times to see which one they liked better. And
did you tell them you're wearing the tape out? Don't listen so much.
No, I just left the room.
Funny.
Once it was on tape, and once the mix was good, I was like,
Well, I've got
they were really cool about that, because they had a couple of their own assistants too, who took care of all this.
Oh, right. So, good. Well, I've got a small quantity of tape story, is that the first Audio Slave record was all tracked to 2-inch, and it was all Bassif, and they had a deal going where every box for the reel of 2-inch had like an empty CD pocket in it with a little coupon that said you can get 1 free blank CD. And this is when blank CDs still cost a decent amount of money, not the like 3 cents each they got down to. And we used 220 something reels of 2-inch tape on that record. Wow. So Dave Schiffman and I stood in the tape library at what is now East West, but it was still Cello then, and just took a picture and sent them all of the coupons. And they actually sent us 220 blank CDs.
Wow. I remember my first CD-ROM recorder was a 2x speed one. It was I think it was almost $2,000.
And the discs were still like $70 each, right?
Yeah, I think when I got them, they were like 10.
Okay.
10
Yeah.
bucks. Yeah. It's 95 is when I got that.
Yeah. These are the We Are Old stories that I paid $1,000 for a 1 gigabyte drive. But when I worked for Synclavier, they sold the 10 megabyte drives for $10,000.
Wow. Yeah. My first big drive I bought was for Sound Tools that I had in '89, and it was a Seagate 1 terabyte, and it was $3,000.
Yeah. Man,
jeez.
Those were the days.
Yeah. Now I just bought a drive to back everything up on 18 terabytes for $300.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
We're old.
That would be $54 million at the price of that 1 terabyte drive.
Yeah. Well, let's figure it out from the 10 megabyte drive.
Right.
Numbers don't go that high.
I know.
Even Bezos couldn't afford that.
Marty McFly was going after sports almanacs. He could have gone after hard drives and brought them back.
Oh my God, absolutely. Except, what would you have hooked them to?
Well, maybe you could have brought the computer too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I've got a cool little thing that I mean, it's so easy to do, but I just sort of marvel over it. I just got one of the new M1 Max laptops, so I figured I'm going to use this one computer for everything. So in my studio, I've got a Thunderbolt 3 hub, so it's feeding two Ethernets, one to the internet, one for the S6 and the DAD, and it's feeding USB to that SSL thing and another monitor, and the Pro Tools HDX cards, the UAD, the whole studio, and the thing's got a power supply in it. So all I do is bring the computer and plug one Thunderbolt cable in, and that's everything.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it is. I love technology.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay.
Okay.
Next question. Next question comes from David, and David says, "Hi Mick, any stories of mixing Mr. Mister? Welcome to the real world. The massive drum snare sound of Kyrie. How is it done? Any sampling involved as well?"
No sample. Well, I think, let's see, I didn't record it. I think there may have been some samples with the drums, and I know that they sent it was at Ocean Way Studios before it was cello. And I know they sent out the drums through the studio monitors and mic'd the room, and that sounded pretty huge too. And that's pretty much in the whole album. On Kiri, not to mess around, just wanted to make it even bigger. So, and I was at Conway Studio A, which is a medium-sized room, not a very long decay time at all. But I wanted to reinforce that drum room sound. So what I ended up doing was sending the mix of the drums out to the studio, but VSOing the machine up to 60 IPS, which is as fast as it would go, and recording the room, and then bringing it back down to 30 IPS, essentially doubled the decay time, brought the resonances down an octave and stuff like that, and helped that big drum sound in a fairly small room.
Wow.
Even though they already had a fairly big drum sound on there anyways, but
that's nice. That's also, that song is the whatever for one of my favorite misheard lyrics things ever, because that was gigantic while I was at school at University of Miami, and there was some girl who got off of the metro wearing headphones and at the top of her lungs yelling, "Carry a laser gun," and like all of the lyrics were about some alien invasion, and she had the whole song going.
Yeah, the whole thing. Wow.
And it all made sense in what she was doing.
When we were mixing it, we were calling it "Carry a Raisin," just holding it.
Nice.
That's great. Okay, I'm gonna ask. So, VSO tricks without a tape machine.
Oh, that's hard.
I miss it so much.
Me too. And then, because some external clocks you can VSO Pro Tools to an extent,
but you got to be printing to a separate Pro Tools rig to keep it. It's, and I think, and I've talked about this before. I love your take on it. While you were tracking, VSO was such a huge part of every tracking session. Like, oh, that shaker doesn't sound right. Oh, we'll VSO it up. It'll drop a little bit. It'll be great. Like, I did it like all day, every day. You would just do it.
Yeah, I remember on one of the Earth, Wind & Fire albums, I think it was the one after Raise, there's a song called "The Speed of Love." Do you know that one?
No, I don't remember that one.
And the brass, there's a brass line that just keeps going up and up and up, and then just gets like really, really small. And what we did is, had a click track and fed it to the brass section while they were recording, and just VSO'd the machine down as they were playing.
Wow.
Like down to half speed. And then but they were hearing the click, and they were, Jerry Hay and those guys are so great. I mean, they were perfect with it, and brought it back up, and it just, it's a cool effect. Check it out. Speed of Love, it's called.
I am definitely going to check that out. I think if someone could figure out a way to do like an intermediate clock kind of thing so that you could do VSO on a track-by-track basis while recording or whatever, it'd be huge.
Yeah. I don't see why it can be done. I mean, because of Pro Tools, it runs anywhere from 44.1 to 192. So, you could, if you're at 48K, you could, I'm sure you can go slower than 44.1. You definitely go up to 96 easily. It should have more of a range than the tape machine.
Yeah, it should. But it don't.
No.
Okay, I dropped the link for that song in the chat, everyone. All right. Next question is from Vadim, and he says, "I really love the snare drums in ballad songs you mixed 20 plus years ago, like Unbreak My Heart by Tony Braxton. Can you tell us how those were mixed?"
Okay. That was on all these ballads. It was pretty much a Pretty much the snare I would I'd sometime if it's I think that one was a sample, so I didn't have to, but I usually gate the snare to keep the hi-hat and stuff out of it. And I'd use old Eventide SP 2016 room reverb program at about 4 seconds.
There you go. And there's a good plug-in in that box now. So
yeah. And then if it did get it, I love the sonic characters of the 2016, but you couldn't. The reverb shape was never, it was always a nice smooth roll off. So sometimes you'd have to gate it, so it didn't get in the way, to shorten it but keep it really dense and up there for for a certain amount of time. So usually have the snare going, gating, triggering a gate for the reverb return. Have the reverb too long, and then just adjust the gate and the release time of the gate to just get the taper I wanted on the reverb.
Talking about stuff like that, there was a great thing you were talking about in an interview where rather than using high shelf on vocals, you use a bell, a parametric band, but up so high that you're only looking at the boost of it. And so you can make any shelf you want out of the bottom half of a bell, because who gives a shit what's going on at 35K? Like, you're not hearing it anyway. I love that.
Yeah, it works great because, it's just the characteristic of a shelving filter is a shelf is always 6 dB per octave, or else it has more than 90 degrees of phase shift and will cause a dip before the shelf. So, but a bell doesn't. It doesn't have more than 90 degrees of phase shift. So you basically just adjust how steep the shelf is by the cue of the bell. And
so if anybody doesn't get it, just put a bell at what, like 20K, something like that?
20K.
And then start messing with the cue and the boost, and you'll hear that you are making your own shelf, and it's brilliant.
Awesome. Okay, next question is from... Oh, they keep shifting on me. Hold on one second. Okay, from Ian. Hey, Mick, are you still using a hybrid setup for mixing or totally in the box now with the S6?
I'm totally in the box with the S6. I think once in a while, well, if it's something orchestral, I use the Bricasti M1 on the string section or something. There's, to me, that's really about the best for that. So, and plus there's plugins that control it and save all its parameters right in the session. So essentially I'm in the box. Being an old fart, I'm getting real lazy and I just want to set up the mix if I have to recall. And
I'm right there with you. So, all right, on the Bricasti, when you're mixing strings, what's your go-to? Are you a Mechanics Hall guy or are you something else?
I usually use just a large hall.
Right.
Yeah, I use a large hall on orchestra, a little pre-delay. Sometimes I use a little less top end roll off, but it's usually from that. I also use the Bricasti sometime on drums, the Studio A program.
Right.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Because I don't have a Bricasti.
For a roomy sound that isn't too long, just it's a nice ambient.
Great. And for people listening, it's not exactly the same, but the Seventh Heaven Professional, which is from Liquid Sonics, it is the Bricasti algorithms. It'll sound different because you don't have all of that hardware front and back end, but it's pretty close and it has all the same programs.
Yeah.
Okay. Charles Root says in the chat that he's done the VSO trick in Reaper. You can change the playback rate with or without changing the pitch and on each individual clip or track. There you go for anybody who has Reaper.
Right. Yeah, and Ableton does the same sort of thing. Sony Vegas did it like years ago, that great sort of time stretching thing. But it's, yeah. So, yeah. There are bits you can do, but it's more about being able to change the speed of what people are playing to as you record so that you drop the pitch or bring the pitch up of the thing you're recording. And it can be a slight change just to timbrally bring cymbals down a little bit. I used to do that a lot with cymbals and shakers, percussion stuff with lots of top end, pitch it down. But also just the effects you can get on Stadium Arcadium, there are tons and tons of guitar overdubs done with the 2-inch VSO'd a fifth, and that get these amazing glassy guitar tones that are impossible to get any other way. And it's not quite the same as the real-time pitch shifting thing, because that will glitch and that can be really cool. But VSO is perfect pitch shifting. It is frequency shifting in a way that you can't do on the fly digitally. It's just a different thing. You can only do it by changing the clock.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Couple
So
more?
is it completely impossible to do that digitally then?
No.
Like
I mean,
there
like
won't
if
be a
you've got
volume
a
thing?
sync IO or sync HD, you can VSO the clock for Pro Tools, but only a certain amount. You can go further if apparently old ADATs are like a great VSO clock thing, because you can set the VSO when they're not even running, and their clock out will change. So you can do it, but the problem is that digital systems are set to only have a certain margin of error before they will complain, and they just won't play back. They'll say like, hey man, something's wrong. I'm not supposed to be, you're nowhere near the sample rate I'm supposed to be at, so I won't play. And that's the problem.
Gotcha.
Tape machines didn't complain. They just did whatever the
It's
hell
not
you
a
told
thing.
them.
Yeah.
It's not a thing that could be like turned
You
into
could even
a
turn them.
plug-in
You could even run them at 15 and record, and then bring it back up to 30 and get an octave of change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay. No VSO plugins in our future. All right.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
it's technically possible. I mean, what you were saying about that the workstations don't go out of a certain clock range. I mean, that's arbitrary. They could design them.
That's programming. That's just code.
Yeah, I mean, I see why is that they have a phase lock loop to minimize jitter. So you can't go too far off that and still have it lock on. But I mean, it'd be nice if they at least had a mode that could loosen that tolerance where you could VSO more.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I love this question. I'm going to skip to it. This is from Gal, and she asks, what's the shittiest equipment you've used to mix, but it sounded great?
Oh, man. Trying to think. I mean, when usually to me, shitty equipment doesn't sound great. I know a lot of people love it. A lot of people make great records.
Well,
with
apparently
it.
those Ampex MX25s, because there are people.
Oh yeah,
still
okay,
loving
yeah, but
that.
I mean, I was thinking of actually a real mixing session from multitrack. The stuff I had in my first home studio was like awful, but I guess got some cool stuff out of that. The only thing I didn't like is those old cheap Ampex machines had so much wow and flutter. But
which now you get plugins to emulate.
yeah,
People pay good money for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to think here what I have run through that. I mean, I've made good equipment sound shitty on purpose. One of the coolest distortions, I think, is taking an LA2A and turning the limiting off and just overdriving the amplifier. That gives a wonderful clipping, and mix it back in a little bit with the undistorted signal.
Awesome. Do you have any of those, Andrew? Any answers for that one?
I don't know. I mean, like I used to use MXR Dynacomp pedals on drums all the time because they're crazy compressors. But now you can do it. I mean, there are a million plugins that do stuff like that. But yeah, when it was gear, I used guitar pedals a lot on drums.
Yeah, I used, let's see, back in the 70s, I used the Mutron 3 was a cool pedal, that envelope follower filter.
Yeah.
I used that a bunch of times.
I got one in the next room.
Yeah. And always in the studio in Rochester, I had always had a Leslie sitting there mic'd up to send stuff through.
Yeah. That's a good one. Okay. Another one on that tangent. What reverb and delay units were your favorite back in the 80s?
In the 80s?
From David. Yeah.
EMT 140. A good one. They're all different. So, if you found a studio with a good one, they could be great. Eventide 2016. I love those. Other than that, they were noisy and they were unreliable, but they just had the coolest sound. AMS RMX 16, Lexicon 480, and I think that's probably about it. I think, let me see if there's anything else I used a lot then. I did very rarely use the reverb that had a gated program in it. I'd usually use something with a long reverb and then gate it and time the gate. But yeah, that's pretty much what I used for reverb there.
Awesome.
I think a real good tip about plates too, and even the plugins to some extent, though not as much as the hardware obviously, is that they change drastically depending on how much level you put into them. And I don't think enough people spend time, like, you'll either leave the return at 0 and then you turn it up until you have as much reverb as you want, or you let the send default to 0 and you turn the return up and down to get the reverb you want. But there's a real dance with the metal-based reverbs because they will ring in different ways depending on how much level you pop in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've used some 140s that I just didn't like at all. They were just so dull and it sounded like an oil drum or something. And then some that were just beautiful and spacious, clear. And so you always had to just check which ones you were using.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, how's everybody doing on time?
I think it's almost beer o'clock here, to be honest.
Okay.
If that's cool, so a couple more?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine. I
Okay.
hear of all my texts. Got everybody at bay.
Pretty good. Okay. This one is from Patty Casey. He says, "Hi Mick, Patty Casey
Hey.
here in Ireland."
Hi, how are you?
He says, "You won't remember mixing my album back in 2007.
Yes, I do.
I would have annoyed you more if I had known at the time everything you worked on. Do you remember what synth you used on Controversy with Prince?"
Oh, I really don't know. As I said, I was just in the control room just to help him get sounds, and then he'd like to do everything himself and leave. So I didn't, and I'd leave so I wasn't really sure. And most of what he was doing was guitar at those days. So I'm not sure whether he did the synth stuff himself later.
Yeah, I mean, because that was pre-Lisa, Wendy and Lisa.
Yeah,
so he would have been doing it all. But yeah, he was also, and maybe not as early on, but he was very much about, like, what's new, and I'm going to use the shit out of it so it becomes mine. Like the D50, he ruined for people because he used every preset in the coolest way possible on a song right when it came out, and nobody could use a D50 for like 2 or 3 years because it just sounded like Prince.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. All right, and one from Joseph. He says, "Can you talk about how to learn to listen?"
I have no idea. I mean, that's
Yeah. It's a problem. We do have a video on Puremix. There's a series called How to Listen, and it focuses on different topics. So there's like a how to listen compression, how to listen reverb, and so on. So that'd be a series you could check out.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a hard question to answer right now.
So broad. Yeah.
But there are, there's pedagogy in how to teach critical listening. And it's, if you really do want to learn it, there's definitely stuff out there, both the how to listen to compression, like that sort of thing specifically for mixers, but there's just critical listening, how to understand when what you're hearing is reverb as opposed to distance between microphones or delays, and like how sound fields come together. And there definitely is resource out there.
Yeah.
But Mick's just a natural. He didn't have to learn it.
Just doing it a long time. That's the learning of it. But I mean, a question of how to listen to a specific thing or specific aspect is something I could answer. But just to listen, listening in general, there's so many aspects.
Yeah, I think, look, and this comes up a lot with a lot of people I've interviewed where early in their career, they were working at a studio that just did everything. And I think jingles is a big part of this because it's not it's not necessarily that that's where you learn to listen, but it's where you learn to be fast because you learn to listen to what's important.
Yeah.
And you don't go off in the weeds because you're always working on records with big producers. You've got lots of time or what, like you just got to move and doing things like that 4-track recording you're talking about. Like I'm going to balance, you're going to mix the rhythm section right now to mono.
Yeah.
Because you have to. And that could be 3 microphones. It could be 70 microphones, but it's going down to mono.
Yeah.
And it's going down fast. So yeah, it's just doing it.
Yeah.
Which is not a helpful answer, but there you go. All right. We're going to say this is the mother of all questions to finish us off here.
This is the one. Okay. This is from Chris. He says, "Hi, gentlemen. Thank you for doing this. Question about perspective while mixing. How often do you take a break while mixing? And what non-pro monitoring systems like an Auratone, iPhone, Boombox, etc. do you check your mixes on?"
Okay, as far as taking breaks, that I work at home, I take a lot of breaks. I didn't used to. If someone's paying for studio time, I figured I'd have to be there. But, there's no specific amount of time. Sometimes I'll work for, a few hours and then take a break. Sometimes it's just a few minutes, depending on just when I need to get away from it to take an ear break.
Yeah, I'm the same.
And as far as other monitors lately, what I've been using is my laptop, just the laptop speakers to check things on. Since they don't go too low, I can hear what I have in the upper bass and the mid-range balances. High end's pretty good, so I can hear the clarity. But that's pretty much it. I haven't in a while, but I should go out in the car sometime because, you can get really big surprises on low end from a car system, but then they're all different too. So,
yeah, I think we're pretty similar. I'm at home. I take, anytime anything comes up, I take a break because I have to, because I just, anything shiny, I will chase it. But when I'm in it, I could work on one thing for a lot. But I take breaks also by just moving on to another song. So when I know I'm not being productive, I don't necessarily just stop working. I'll just okay, I'm going to open up a different song and be productive there. Or I've got something I know that needs prepping. So it's a little bit more mindless or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually stick to one song. Unless, no, not always. Of course, a lot of projects I do are just mixing one song. But if I'm working on an album, I'll go from one to another too. Yeah, just whatever feels right at the time. That's the great thing about working at home.
Yes. Whatever feels right at the time. I think that is a perfect phrase to end with, because that's the answer to every question.
Yeah.
Whatever feels right at the time.
Yeah. No rules in this at all.
No, no, not at all. Mick, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking so much time.
Thank you, and sorry I was late.
No, it's fine. It worked out because I was starting to panic, so it was perfect. You got my heart rate up, which I need. I need more aerobic exercise, I've been told. So yeah, it was awesome.
I was just sound asleep, and then holy shit, it's 11 o'clock.
Nice. Well, it all worked out. It was great. And so, Mark, we're not doing anything next week.
No, nothing. Nothing.
We don't. This is all very much up in the air, and I apologize. Yeah. It's all my fault that everything is so up in the air, but it's all up in the air. So I don't know what we're doing, but we will do something on a Monday soon, and then that's what we'll be doing. But until then, now is when we wave awkwardly, and I mute stuff and switch to the thanks for watching screen, which is a generic one because I didn't know what was going on.